Chapter 465. The super dark horse Chu Mu's reputation was extremely resounding. Everyone in the East Saint City knew about him. This was because the million swordsmen who were watching the Battle of Providence would spread the news of what they had seen every day after they left the heaven-extinguishing sword arena. There were even people who were in charge of compiling the daily battle reports, which recorded the details of every single match. A battle report cost 1,000 low-grade spiritual stones. This price was rather high, but there were many people who wanted to buy it. Every day, the supply could not meet the demand. Since they could not see it with their own eyes, they could only see the situation from the battle report. It was better than not knowing anything. Some merchants in the East Saint City had also opened bets for 4 people: Lai Kongyang, Lu Yuan, Ao Xingyun, and Chu Mu. Chu Mu's odds were rather high. It was a pity that he was in the East Saint Palace and did not know about it. Otherwise, he would have made a fortune by betting on himself. On the 13th day, the Battle of Providence started again. One battle after another, each with their own victory and defeat. Chu Mu once again appeared on the battle arena. His opponent was a female swordsman from the Bright Moon Sword Mansion. Her name was Yenyuro, and she was known as the Extreme Ice Sword Hero. She was very beautiful, but her expression was very cold. Her eyes were even colder. She constantly emitted a cold aura, as if she was a block of ice. She was dressed in a moon-white long robe with traces of icy blue. She looked like a glacier under the sunlight, and there was a soul-stirring beauty to her. The Extreme Ice Sword Hero, Yenyuro, had won 12 matches and lost 11. She had lost 1 match, and that match was under the sword of Lu Yuan. The strength of the Extreme Ice Sword Hero was obvious to all, and Chu Mu was equally strong. However, none of the opponents he had faced so far could compare to the Extreme Ice Sword Hero. Who do you think will win, the Zhentian Sword Hero or the Extreme Ice Sword Hero? I support the Extreme Ice Sword Hero. We will only know the outcome after the battle. I heard that the Extreme Ice Sword Hero possesses the rare Extreme Ice Sword body. In my opinion, Chu Mu's winning streak will be broken this time. The Extreme Ice Sword body is an innate sword body that is 1 level higher than the Ice Spirit Sword body. It can easily comprehend the concept of ice and raise it to perfection in the shortest amount of time. Moreover, it can increase the power of the concept of ice by 20%, which is 1 level higher than the Ice Spirit Sword body. Under the Extreme Ice Sword physique, one can unleash 120% of the ice concept's power. How terrifying! Her Extreme Ice Sword technique is also very powerful. The concept of ice was originally stronger than the concept of water. The power of the 100% concept of ice was probably close to the 110% concept of water. If it was increased by another 20%, its power would be close to the 130% concept of water. Thinking of this, Chu Mu felt a little excited. In terms of sword chi cultivation, he had just broken through to the Chi High Realm last night. De Shang, on the other hand, had been at the peak of the Chi High Realm for a few years and had accumulated a lot of experience. In terms of sword chi purity, Chu Mu was not inferior to his opponent at all. This was because the sword chi art that he cultivated was of the earth level. The higher the level of the sword chi art, the more precious it was. Among the 100 sword heroes participating in the Battle of Fortune, other than Chu Mu, the highest level sword chi art was Lai Kongyang's. It was of the earth level upper level. The higher the level of the sword chi art, the thicker and purer the sword chi cultivated. Therefore, in terms of sword aura, Chu Mu's Desolate Sky sword aura was only slightly inferior to Yenyuro's in terms of density and purity. However, the opponent had the Extreme Ice Sword body. Other than the 20% increase in ice concept, it also had a clear increase in ice-type sword aura. As Elder Long announced the start of the battle, Yenyuro slashed out with her sword. Her extreme rank sword was the Ice Soul Sword. It looked like it was made out of ice and was emitting a shockingly cold chi. As she slashed out with her sword, a ray of ice shot towards Chu Mu. Extreme ice break. As the cold chi descended, the air was filled with countless ice shards. Chu Mu could clearly feel the shocking cold chi rolling towards him, as if it was going to freeze him. The entire arena was covered by the cold chi, as if it had suddenly entered a cold winter. Yenyuro's sword attack looked simple, but it actually contained the chi of heaven and earth. Her ice sword chi and concept of ice had been enhanced by the extreme ice sword body, making it extremely powerful. Everyone opened their eyes wide, wanting to see how Chu Mu would deal with it. Would he use the same method as before to defeat his opponent with one sword attack? In the previous 12 battles, Chu Mu did not try to dodge at all. Instead, he faced his opponent's sword skill head-on and defeated his opponent with one sword attack. Now, facing Yenyuro's sword skill, what would Chu Mu do? After slashing out her sword attack, Yenyuro's body flashed. Her feet seemed to be skating on ice, but her speed was unbelievably fast. In the blink of an eye, she appeared behind Chu Mu and stabbed out again. Extreme ice thorn. With a simple slide, Yenyuro's surroundings immediately changed. A layer of frost covered the ground of the arena. The cold chi was biting cold, and a world of ice and snow was descending. To Yenyuro, this kind of environment was the most beneficial for her. To the others, it was disadvantageous. Their strength would be limited, and in this kind of situation, Yenyuro's chances of winning would be higher. The spectators could also see this, and could not help but worry for Chu Mu. Only Lai Kongyang, Lu Yuan, and Ao Xingyun did not have any thoughts about this. Indeed, there was a connection between the environment and strength. However, when the difference in strength was too big, no matter how good the environment was, it would only give one a slight advantage. In the end, one would still lose to absolute strength. Of course, their thoughts were directed at themselves. In their opinion, this was the end for Chu Mu. In front of him, there was a powerful blast of ice with astonishing power. Behind him, there was a sword stabbing out. This sword was wrapped in cold chi and made a whimpering sound. The sword was condensed with 100% ice concept, and the entire sword seemed to be one size bigger. The power was very condensed and terrifying. Just as the sword stabbed out, Chu Mu felt a layer of ice spread over his protective sword chi. It was as if it was about to be broken, and it made a creaking sound. If it was the Tianyuan sword chi of the past, it would have already been broken. However, the protective sword chi formed by the Tianyuan sword chi was very strong, and it also had corrosive properties. When Yenyuro's sword stabbed out, a large part of the cold chi was corroded by the Tianyuan sword chi. The remaining small part only covered the surface. Yenyuro's eyes flashed with a hint of surprise. The speed of her sword suddenly increased by 30%, and its power also increased by 30%. How would Chu Mu deal with a pincer attack from the front and back? Everyone's attention was lifted. This was a very important scene. Other than Chen Buer, everyone from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion stood up and subconsciously clenched their fists. Even though Chu Mu had won 12 matches in a row, and this result was much better than any tournament in the past 60 years, they still felt very happy. However, at this moment, they still hoped that Chu Mu could continue to win. Perhaps it was an extravagant hope, but it was the deepest expectation in their hearts. Yenyuro made full use of her advantage, and raised her speed to the extreme. With a pincer attack from the front and back, Chu Mu's situation was critical. Yenyuro's fighting style also exceeded Chu Mu's expectations, but it was not enough to shock Chu Mu. This was the first time Chu Mu used the flying swan illusory steps on the battle arena. A strange scene appeared. In everyone's eyes, Chu Mu seemed to be retreating, and the angle of Yenyuro's sword also adjusted. It was as though she had locked onto Chu Mu. In the next moment, everyone realized that Chu Mu was advancing. He appeared on the other side of Yenyuro. When he was a few meters away, He unsheathed his sword and slashed down. A dark golden waning moon that was more than 10 meters long appeared again. Whether it was the world of ice and snow or the daytime, all the light disappeared. Only darkness enveloped the area. A dark golden waning moon was extremely resplendent. It instantly broke through the darkness and slashed towards Yenjuro. Yenjuro's expression, which was like a 10,000-year-old iceberg, suddenly changed. Not only did the ice that she slashed out not attack Chu-Mu, but it was also bombarding her. Her second sword technique was aimed at the other side, where the illusion was. More importantly, Chu-Mu's counterattack had already arrived. Yenjuro had already seen the power of the dark golden waning moon 12 times. It was because she did not want to face Chu-Mu's sword technique head-on that Yenjuro had come up with this strategy. She wanted to make full use of her advantage and freeze the ground, which would increase her speed to the extreme. At the same time, she wanted to cover the surroundings with cold air, which would affect Chu-Mu's agility to a certain extent. Strengthening herself and weakening her opponent was a very correct strategy. At the same time, it was also unexpected. Yenjuro was sure that she had an 80% chance of winning. Unfortunately, she had underestimated Chu-Mu. Everyone had underestimated Chu-Mu. The second level of the Flying Swan illusory steps was more than 10 times more exquisite than the first level. Yenjuro reacted quickly. Her feet slid on the ice surface to the side. The ice that was bombarding her swept past her side, making her black hair flutter. She tried her best to pull back her sword. The dark golden waning moon was not far away from her. Unless she could increase her speed by 2 times, she would not be able to dodge it. She drew a circle in front of her with her sword. The ice sword chi and the ice mentality mixed together. A diamond-shaped circular mirror appeared in front of her. Extreme Snow Cold Ice Mirror. The Cold Ice Mirror was the only defensive sword move of Yenjuro's Extreme Snow Sword arts. Its defensive power was very strong. With a boom, the stone-shaking wave sword slashed onto the cold ice mirror. The cold ice mirror instantly shook and exploded. It turned into countless ice shards that shot out in all directions. The powerful impact crashed onto Yenjuro's body, shattering her protective sword chi and sending her flying back. Yenjuro was very powerful. She did not crash into the seal or fall down. However, her face was pale and there was blood at the corner of her mouth. That sword attack had already damaged her organs. Following that, Yenjuro's expression changed. She felt that there was a strange sword chi inside her body that was constantly corroding and destroying. She had to use her ice sword chi to suppress it. The scene suddenly became silent. Everyone stared with their eyes wide open, speechless. "You win," Yenjuro said after a long while. Her voice was very cold, almost freezing everyone. Following her words, a fate dragon rushed out of Chu-Mu's body and rushed towards Yenjuro. When it came back, it was already more than 10 meters long. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 466. What a terrifying battle awareness, Chen Buer said to himself. The battle between Chu-Mu and Yenjuro ended in just a few breaths of time. It didn't seem to be anything special, but only an expert like him could see the profoundness of that moment. Chu-Mu's reaction was to be able to accurately grasp the best timing in an unfavorable environment, dodge and counterattack. Even the slightest mistake in timing wouldn't do. You are indeed quite powerful and worthy of my attention. Ao Xingyun smiled faintly. However, it's hard to say how many strikes you can take from me. Lu Yuan also smiled and didn't say anything. He only looked towards the Deqian sword abode and locked onto Lai Kongyang. In his mind, there was only one opponent, Lai Kongyang. He didn't care about anyone else, including Ao Xingyun. As for Lai Kongyang, he didn't have any expression. He didn't care about such strength at all. Perhaps Lu Yuan could force him to take 2 more strikes. That was all. Up until now, he had won 13 consecutive battles. It wasn't easy to defeat Yenjuro, especially with one strike. It had to be said that Yenjuro was unlucky. Of all the people she could fight, she had to fight Chu Mu. Although Chu Mu's ripping concept wasn't perfect, it had reached 98% and wasn't far from perfect. Its power was equivalent to a 128% metal concept. In terms of the power of the concept, Yenjuro's ice concept had reached 120% of the water concept under the amplification of the extreme ice sword physique. It wasn't much different from Chu Mu's. In terms of the exquisiteness of her sword technique, it wasn't any worse than Chu Mu's Stonequake sword. In terms of the cultivation of her sword aura, she was even slightly better than Chu Mu. In particular, her extreme ice sword technique had become even more terrifying under the amplification of the extreme ice sword physique. It was a pity that she couldn't withstand Chu Mu's Stonequake force. The power of the perfect stone tremor energy was extremely powerful. It was not inferior to the perfect ordinary energy concept. This meant that the Stonequake wave sword was much more powerful than her extreme ice sword technique. Of course, without the Stonequake, the power of Chu Mu's sword could not compare to Yenjuro's extreme ice sword technique. The combination of all kinds of forces, coupled with the timing and control of the entire battle situation, finally completed a counterattack that seemed simple but was actually difficult for many people. Staying in his room, Chu Mu recalled his battle with Yenjuro while continuing to comprehend the tearing concept. Once the concept was raised to perfection, the power would become even stronger. For example, the difference between a 98% and a 99% rending intent couldn't be compared to the difference between 99% and 100% rending intent. With the support of the 10-foot-long Destiny Dragon, Chu Mu's perception became even more terrifying. After a single night, his tearing concept had risen to 99%. This was an increase in absolute strength. After a short rest, the sky brightened up. The 14th day's battle for fortune was about to begin. Basically, up until now, the focus of the battle had been on the 4 undefeated sword heroes. The battles between the others had become a foil. This was something that couldn't be helped. Moreover, according to the rules of the past, once a victor was decided between the 4 of them and the strongest was determined, the battle for karmic luck would come to an end. Chu Mu estimated that in today's battle, the 4 of them would have to face each other. It was just that he didn't know who would face who. After a few battles, Elder Long announced loudly. Lai Kong Yang and Ao Xingyun's figures flashed and appeared on the battle arena together. All of a sudden, the entire heaven-battling sword arena seemed to explode. The cheers were like waves. The 3rd and 1st sword heroes were finally going to clash. Lai Kong Yang, I have been waiting for this moment for a long time. The battle intent in Ao Xingyun's eyes burned fiercely. He pulled out his sword and pointed it at Lai Kong Yang. His voice was like thunder. I have nothing to look forward to. Lai Kong Yang, on the other hand, had a calm and indifferent expression. Those who were familiar with Lai Kong Yang would not be deceived by his appearance. How could a person who was known as the Burning Heaven Sword hero have such a leisurely appearance? He was just looking down on his opponent's strength. Soon you will take back your words. Ao Xingyun grinned. A terrifying sharpness soared into the sky, shaking heaven and earth. It was purer, more illusory, and sharper than the sword aura. It was as if it could cut through everything. Sword intent. 3 parts sword intent. All the swordsmen who could recognize the sword intent were stunned. Their eyes were filled with shock. Even if some people had guessed it, guesses were just guesses. Seeing it with their own eyes was truly shocking. He really comprehended sword intent. Bailey Jiang, he shook his head, his face filled with bitterness. Even the 3rd Ao Xingyun comprehended sword intent. Not to mention the 2nd Lu Yuan and 1st Lai Kong Yang. Lord, actually, Chu Mu was able to win 13 battles in a row. It was completely out of our expectations. Even if he stops here, we should still be happy. An elder advised. Chenbuer glanced at Chu Mu. He was a little confused because he didn't see any worry on Chu Mu's face. Instead, after a flash of surprise, there was a trace of excitement and battle intent. Could it be that Chu Mu also comprehended sword intent? Chenbuer couldn't help but think. He immediately shook his head and thought that it was impossible. He was extremely talented, but he also only comprehended sword intent when he broke through to the 9th transformation realm. He knew very well how difficult it was to comprehend sword intent at the Qi High realm. He knew that in the past 1,000 years, there were no more than 10 swordsmen in the entire Eastern Sword region who could comprehend sword intent at the Qi High realm. In the entire Great Kuan dynasty, there wasn't even one. You have piqued my interest. Lai Kong Yang's eyes moved as he smiled. Compared to his casual attitude before, he seemed to be a little more serious. If you don't use your true strength, you will lose. Ao Xingyun, whose sword intent reached the clouds, threw out a sword attack. This sword attack seemed to break the space in front of him. Lai Kong Yang threw out a sword attack and counterattack. There was also a ripple of sword intent. The two sword chi that contained sword intent cancelled each other out. Ao Xingyun's body suddenly appeared in midair. He threw out a sword attack from above. In an instant, a vast aura descended. A visible purple light was like a line between heaven and earth. There was no beginning and no end. This strike contained 100% concept of lightning, dense and pure sword chi from a mid-grade earth-rank sword chi technique, and the fusion of sword intent. Moreover, it was a technique that was summed up from the foundation of these three to form this powerful sword skill. This sword attack gave people the feeling that it was impossible to dodge, because you couldn't see the beginning or the end. It seemed that no matter where you were, you would be hit. Sword hero sword skill, a line in the sky. Interesting. A hint of a smile flashed across Lai Kong Yang's face. He did not dodge, nor did he move his feet. His sword drooped down, and then he swung it up. Nothing special happened. In an instant, a red light shot across the sky. This sword attack contained 100% fire intent, an even purer and thicker sword chi from a high earth realm sword chi art, and a sword intent that was as strong as Ao Xingyun's. Sword hero sword skill, flame cut. Lai Kong Yang has used a sword skill. Many people were excited because this was Lai Kong Yang's true sword technique from the start of the battle up until now. As soon as the flame cut was used, the sky and earth seemed to be separated by this red sword light. The purple light slashed horizontally, and the red light slashed vertically, forming a red and purple cross. With a popping sound like a bubble bursting, the purple light was cut in half by the red light. It flew past Lai Kong Yang's left and right sides, creating countless ripples on the seal. The red light slashed towards Ao Xingyun, who was in midair. Ao Xingyun only felt that the world in front of him had disappeared. There was only a bright red light that kept enlarging and filling his eyes. It couldn't contain anything else. Good timing. Ao Xingyun's battle intent was almost crazy. He held his sword with both hands and raised it again in midair. Sword chi and sword intent mixed together and gushed out. Purple lightning wrapped around him like a thunder god. Take my full power sword attack. One sword. Shocking the heavens. As if a thunder god's roar shook the heavens and earth, Ao Xingyun's sword slashed down. This sword was 10 times more resplendent than Chu Mu's dark golden waning moon, 10 times more breathtaking, and 10 times more powerful. One shocking the heavens. Ao Xingyun's famous sword skill was also his best sword skill. His most powerful sword attack could even shock the sky and earth. When this sword attack was used, it was either victory or defeat. Still not enough. Lai Kong Yang sighed softly. He raised his head and looked at the purple light that cut across the sky. It was 10 times more intense than the previous purple light. The red light dissipated as soon as it touched. It was as if the sky and earth were falling apart, the moon was destroyed and the stars were sinking. The hard ground of the arena that had been sealed could not withstand this terrifying pressure. Layers of ripples spread out as if it was going to shatter at any time. Lai Kongyang was like an ant in front of that purple light. He was incomparably small, but no one dared to underestimate him. His black hair danced wildly. There was a flame burning in Lai Kongyang's eyes. The sword in his hand seemed to ignite by itself. This flame turned from red to green, without a trace of impurity. Perfection meant that the flame's temperature was unbelievably high. It was still one sword attack. From left to right, the green light shot out violently. Sword hero sword skill, green flame cut. With a boom, the green light and purple light collided and exploded. Everyone felt as if there was a sudden clap of thunder in their ears. The explosion made everyone feel dizzy and on the verge of collapse. Countless green and purple lights exploded like fireworks. They shot out in all directions and hit on the seal, creating layers of ripples like a rainstorm. A large amount of green and purple light formed a mixed shockwave that rushed towards Ao Xingyun in midair. This strange scene made people's pupils contract rapidly. It showed Lai Kongyang's shocking control. Just from this point, it could be seen how big the gap between Ao Xingyun and Lai Kongyang was. A figure flew out and rushed towards the sky before falling down again. Ao Xingyun's face was a little pale. Sword Hero King is indeed worthy of its name. Although I still have some energy left, I am still not your opponent. Ao Xingyun very calmly admitted that he was not as good as Lai Kongyang. He had used all of his strength in that strike just now. On the other hand, looking at Lai Kongyang's expression, it would be good if he had used 70% of his strength. I lost. As his voice fell, the fate dragon on Lai Kongyang's body rushed out. When it returned, it was already close to 40 feet long. Great Qian Sword Mansion Sky Burning Sword Hero Lai Kongyang wins. Elder Long announced loudly. Without giving everyone time to digest, he announced again, the next battle, Hidden Dragon Sword Mansion Sky Breaking Sword Hero Lu Yuan vs. At the same time, he looked towards the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 467. Lu Yuan. Lu Yuan. Lu Yuan, Chu Mu. Chu Mu. Chu Mu, Lu Yuan will definitely win. Bullshit, maybe Chu Mu will win. Impossible. Chu Mu is indeed very powerful, but that depends on who he is compared to. Ao Xingyun has comprehended sword intent, so Lu Yuan must have comprehended sword intent as well. Even if it's just a fraction of sword intent, its power is still much greater than the extreme sword force. Chu Mu is definitely not Lu Yuan's match. You're right. Heaven Breaker and Jin Tian. Heaven Breaker is definitely stronger. Among the millions of viewers, a portion of them were Chu Mu's fans, but they were not loyal enough. Therefore, they could not refute Lu Yuan's words. Subconsciously, they also felt that Chu Mu was indeed no match for Lu Yuan, even though they did not want to admit it. Do you hear their voices? Lu Yuan stood in front of Chu Mu. Looking at Chu Mu, he smiled faintly and said, "You are not my match. I advise you not to humiliate yourself." "How do you know I'm not your opponent if we haven't even fought?" Chu Mu asked, amused. "It is very unexpected for you to be able to win 13 matches in a row until now. I heard that you have such strength after becoming a sword hero for only 3 years. Your talent is very impressive. If I give you a few more years, you might be able to make me take you seriously." Lu Yuan said slowly. The confidence and condescension in his tone was very obvious. "I can see that you are a person with a strong will. Otherwise, you wouldn't have achieved what you have today. Since that's the case, I'll let you use those 2 sword skills and then admit defeat yourself. Otherwise, you'll have to bear the consequences." Lu Yuan is so domineering. Senior brother Lu is really too domineering. Towards Lu Yuan's words, Chu Mu merely laughed. The other party's tone and attitude was like an elder speaking to a younger generation. Others might think that it was natural and right, and that he was very domineering. However, in Chu Mu's eyes, it was merely an act of self-righteousness. "As you wish," Chu Mu replied calmly. He unsheathed the demon-slaying sword, and a 10-meter-long dark golden crescent moon appeared. It was still so breathtaking and soul-stirring. Lu Yuan's figure flashed, and the dark golden crescent moon slashed at the seal, creating slight ripples. Chu Mu casually stabbed out with his sword again, and a finger-thick dark golden sword light shot towards Lu Yuan. Lu Yuan easily dodged it, and the sky-splitter sword hit the seal, and once again, a slight ripple spread out. Both strikes missed. Chu Mu knew that the power of those two strikes was not bad, but to the current him, it was already outdated. It could not do anything to Lu Yuan at all, so he just casually attacked. Those who did not understand began to argue. They thought that since Chu Mu's two strikes could not do anything to Lu Yuan, he was definitely not Lu Yuan's match. "Now, tell me your answer. Do you want to admit defeat obediently, or do you want me to beat you down?" Lu Yuan looked at Chu Mu and said calmly, a trace of cold lightning in his eyes. "You have nothing to be proud of in front of me," Chu Mu replied calmly. "In that case..." Lu Yuan did not finish his sentence, and his body suddenly emitted an aura that soared into the sky. A majestic sword pressure that seemed to pierce through the sky swept out like an invisible storm, and in the blink of an eye, it wreaked havoc in the entire arena. Ordinary sword masters would find it difficult to withstand this kind of sword pressure, but Chu Mu's expression did not change. He was like a pillar that supported the sky, and no matter how strong the storm was, he would not move. A trace of surprise flashed in Lu Yuan's eyes. Chu Mu was not affected by his sword pressure at all, which was beyond his expectations. "Very good. You have successfully aroused my interest," Lu Yuan said. His expression changed, and cold lightning flashed in his eyes. His body swayed, and his feet seemed to take random steps. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Chu Mu. Two faint golden flaming tails streaked across the sky like shooting stars. That was because Lu Yuan's speed was too fast, and it left behind a bright light in the air. The golden longsword pierced through the air and slashed towards Chu Mu's neck. It was as fast as lightning. So fast. Many people were shocked. To break the sky, not only must you have enough power, you must also have enough speed, the Hidden Dragon Sword Mansion's mansion master said softly. Ao Xingyun's eyes lit up, and a trace of interest flashed in Lai Kongyang's eyes. Lu Yuan's speed was very fast, and it was beyond Chu Mu's expectations. However, it was not beyond Chu Mu's acceptable range. The demon-slaying sword was raised diagonally. There was no block, only counterattack. In terms of sword speed, Chu Mu was faster. If Lu Yuan continued to attack, Chu Mu's sword would hit him first. Although he was very confident in his protective sword chi, he wanted to win beautifully. His body swayed, and Lu Yuan dodged Chu Mu's sword. He appeared beside Chu Mu and stabbed out again. Chu Mu turned his wrist, and the sword he had raised was leveled. It slashed horizontally at an even speed, aiming straight for Lu Yuan's neck. Lu Yuan did not dodge this time. His sword suddenly shook, and a sword flower with 12 petals appeared instantly. It was very lifelike, and it enveloped Chu Mu's entire head. Chu Mu's sword tip shook slightly, and a wave of sword light was heard. Shoo! 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 Countless tiny sword light crisscrossed, shattering the sword flower. The sword light then condensed into a cold star and shot towards Lu Yuan. Although Lu Yuan was surprised by Chu Mu's superb sword art, he did not have any intention of backing off. He waved his long sword, shattering the cold star. Countless finger-sized golden lights pierced through the air, and each of them contained a powerful piercing mentality. 100% of the piercing mentality was equivalent to 120% of the metal mentality. The piercing mentality was a mutation of the metal mentality. Its power was reflected in the piercing, which was extremely sharp. It was different from the cutting mentality, as it brought out the piercing power of the metal mentality to the extreme. It was a rare mutated mentality. Chu Mu could clearly feel the sharpness of the opponent's golden sword aura. The aura directly pierced through his protective sword aura and came straight at him. The demon-slaying sword slashed out in a small area, shattering the sword light one after another. It then turned into little cold stars to counterattack. In terms of power, the tearing mentality was more powerful than the piercing mentality. Everyone opened their eyes wide without blinking. They could see that Chu Mu and Lu Yuan were using basic sword arts in the battle. The two were attacking each other with their swords almost face to face. During the attack, they had to dissolve the other's attack and then counterattack. There was no dodging. Moreover, every sword attack contained a powerful mentality and sword chi. The power was extremely shocking, and it was 10 times more dangerous than using sword art. After all, when using sword arts, there would always be some distance between the two parties, and there would be more time. Moreover, using sword arts required some time. Although the time was very short, it was different for basic sword art. For a swordsman who could become a sword hero, the basic sword arts had already been cultivated to the point that it had become an instinct. Often, before the mind could react, the body would have already followed the instinct as the best reaction. Ao Xingyun and Lai Kongyang both squinted their eyes. They were a little surprised that Chu Mu's sword arts were so high that he could fight with Lu Yuan without being at a disadvantage. In a short span of 10 breaths, Chu Mu and Lu Yuan had attacked each other hundreds of times. Every time, they would first break the opponent's attack and then counterattack. Once hit, even if the opponent didn't die, he would be injured. The two swords were unbelievably fast, and people couldn't see them clearly. They could only vaguely see a blurry sword shadow. Everyone held their breath. At this time, no one talked about anything because they couldn't think of anything else. They wished they could grow a few more eyes, and they wished they could have a photographic memory to remember this scene. After another 10 breaths, the two swords inevitably collided a few times. Countless sparks splashed out, and the ear-piercing sound of metal clashing resounded throughout the battle arena. Elder Long in the sky revealed a surprised look. Like everyone else, he also thought that Chu Mu would be defeated by Lu Yuan in a few moves. But now, it seemed that this wasn't the case. At least until now, Chu Mu didn't show any signs of being at a disadvantage. On the contrary, Lu Yuan was almost hit by Chu Mu several times, and seemed to be at a disadvantage. This was obviously a very inconceivable thing. Every powerful swordsman was not only powerful in their sword skills, but also in their basic swordsmanship. For a powerful swordsman, basic swordsmanship was an indispensable foundation. The more powerful a swordsman was, the more he would understand the importance of basic swordsmanship. As one of the strongest sword masters in the Eastern sword domain, Lu Yuan understood this very well. He had also spent a period of time painstakingly training his basic sword technique. Therefore, in terms of mastery of basic sword techniques, Lu Yuan was confident that he was not inferior to Lai Kongyang. But now, not only was he unable to gain the upper hand in the prolonged battle with Chu Mu, but he was also in a disadvantageous position. How could Lu Yuan not be shocked? It's time for real. That's right. Since I can't defeat Chu Mu with my swordsmanship, I can only use my true strength. Chu Mu's figure flickered as he dodged the swoosh of swords. However, he did not approach immediately. He wanted Lu Yuan to use his true strength and defeat him while he was at his full strength. This was equivalent to pushing his aura to its peak and paving the way for his battle with Lai Kongyang. The incomparably massive sword pressure permeated out once again, instantly filling up the entire arena. It was as if an invisible storm was wreaking havoc. Fine ripples appeared on the seals around the arena, as if they had all been attacked at the same time. Lu Yuan's previous nonchalance was swept away. His face was full of seriousness, and his eyes were cold and threatening. "I take back what I said before," Lu Yuan said in an unprecedentedly serious tone. "You are very strong. You are qualified to make me use my true strength." Chu Mu faintly smiled and didn't say anything. "However, if it's only my true strength, you are still not qualified to make me use my full strength." The corner of Lu Yuan's mouth twitched as a strange smile appeared on his face. "Next, I will show you the power of the second step of swordsmanship, sword intent." As soon as he finished speaking, an indescribably sharp aura gushed out, as if an invisible sword was going to pierce the sky. Sword intent. It's sword intent. As expected, Lu Yuan has also comprehended sword intent. It seems to be more powerful than Ao Xingyun's. Since Lu Yuan has used sword intent, the outcome is clear. Speaking of which, Chu Mu is also very strong. He forced Lu Yuan to use sword intent. In a few years, his achievements might surpass Lu Yuan's. The people of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion sighed. This scene was unavoidable. Even though they had won 13 matches in a row, which was an unprecedentedly good result, they were still a little unwilling. 5 points of sword intent is indeed very strong. A strange smile appeared on Chu Mu's face. "However, I also have sword intent. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation." Chapter 468. Once Chu Mu's words came out, there was an awkward silence. Even Lu Yuan, who was spewing out his sword intent, paused for a moment. His sword intent was somewhat unstable. After a long while, everyone finally came to their senses. "Am I hallucinating?" Chu Mu said he also has sword intent? "How is that possible?" "Yeah, sword intent. That's not sword force." Chu Mu wouldn't have been scared silly, right? Obviously, no one believed that Chu Mu also had sword intent. In the entire Eastern Sword domain, it was already very rare to have 3 swordsmen who had comprehended sword intent in the Qi High Realm. It could be said that they were the most outstanding generation in the Eastern Sword domain in the past 100 years. No one dared to think about it. Chen Bu Er's eyes, which had been squinting all this time, suddenly widened. A terrifying light shot through the air like cold lightning, leaving a trail of several meters long. On the other hand, Bailey Jiang He and the others widened their eyes and opened their mouths wide. Chu Mu said he also has sword intent. Bailey Jiang He's throat was extremely dry, as if he had walked in the desert for 3 days and 3 nights without drinking a drop of water. The elders and the other 9 swordsmen all nodded with difficulty like dumbfounded geese. "Haha, I'm dying of laughter. He actually said he also has sword intent. What does he think sword intent is?" A swordsman, who was defeated by Chu Mu with 1 sword and was filled with unwillingness, laughed out loud and ridiculed without restraint. There were also people with dignified faces. For example, Ao Xingyun's face was dignified. Lai Kongyang, on the other hand, had an interested and somewhat surprised expression. Faintly, everyone seemed to have heard a rumbling sound, as if a storm was descending and thunder was wreaking havoc. From Chu Mu's vigorous body, a shocking sharpness and aura gushed out and rushed into the sky. It was like a peerless divine sword that could ignore all obstacles. Zhentian moved the ground. The sword pressure brought by Lu Yuan was instantly shattered and swept away. Sword, 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 facts were the best proof. Many people stuttered and pointed at Chu Mu, their fingers trembling. They couldn't say the words sword intent. The sword hero who mocked Chu Mu almost bit his own tongue. His face was full of shock, and then it turned into dejection. Once the sword intent came out, he didn't even have the qualifications to challenge Chu Mu. Not even the slightest bit. They were basically people from 2 different worlds. Elder Long's eyes shone with an incomparably intense light, as if it was going to pierce through the void and land on Chu Mu's body. There was a raging storm in his heart that could not be suppressed and almost rushed out of his chest. Sword intent and its 5 points. Elder Long muttered in a voice that only he could hear. His tone was filled with unconcealable shock and astonishment. No matter if it's Lai Kongyang, Lu Yuan, or Ao Xingyun, it's indeed surprising that they could comprehend sword intent. But if you think about it carefully, it's not that surprising. After all, their talents are the best in the entire Eastern Sword region, and they've been sword heroes for more than 10 years. They're already in their 30s, and this Chumu is only 23 years old this year. To comprehend sword intent at the age of 23. Elder Long didn't dare to continue thinking. It seemed that in the history of the Eastern Sword region that he knew, there had never been a 23-year-old sword hero who had comprehended sword intent in the past 3,000 years. The highest record in the past 3,000 years was a sword hero named Gu Tiancheng, who had comprehended sword intent at the age of 25. However, it was only 1 point of sword intent, and not the 5 points that Chu Mu had displayed. In other words, the time that Chu Mu had to comprehend sword intent had to be pushed back. It might be 1 or 2 years. To comprehend sword intent at the age of 21 or 22, how monstrous was that? This was no longer something that could be described with just 3,000 years. Elder Long was certain that Chu Mu was definitely the first to comprehend sword intent in the past 5,000 years of the Eastern Sword region. A monstrous genius that only appeared once every 5,000 years in the Eastern Sword region. Elder Long had already decided that once today's battle ended, he would immediately report everything about Chu Mu to the Temple Master. Then, he would report it to the 100 Saints Alliance in the Central Main Sword region. Extremely excited, Elder Long's wooden face was filled with excitement. The ancient Sword continent had 5 major sword regions. The Central Sword region was naturally where the 100 Saints Alliance was located, while the 4 major sword regions each had a holy city. They were the holy cities of the East, West, North, South, and East, West, North, and South holy temples. Where there were people, there would be competition. There was also competition between the 5 main sword regions. This competition came from various aspects, and one of them was the geniuses in the respective sword regions. A sword cultivator that could be labeled as a genius by the 100 Saints Alliance was at least at the level of a peerless genius. Before Chu Mu, Lai Kongyang was already a peerless genius. His information had long been reported to the 100 Saints Alliance. In the past 100 years, although there weren't many peerless geniuses in the Eastern Sword region, Lai Kongyang wasn't the only one. It was just that compared to the Southern, Western, and Northern Sword regions, there were a lot less. In the past, when the 100 Saints Alliance gathered, the Eastern Sage Hall would inevitably be ridiculed and even mocked by the Southern, Northern, and Southern sacred palaces. But now there was a Chu Mu. Elder Long was certain that Chu Mu wasn't some peerless genius. He was the kind of genius that stood above the peerless geniuses. Such people had a name: monstrous genius. A monstrous genius would bring more glory to the Eastern Sage Hall than 10 peerless geniuses. If it wasn't for the fact that the battle for karmic luck was extremely important, Elder Long would have already stopped the battle and immediately returned to the Eastern Sage Hall to meet with the Temple Master. In an instant, Lai Kongyang's eyes shone with a terrifying light. Chu Mu, who he didn't put in his eyes from the beginning, had finally aroused some interest in him. "Let's see if you can defeat Lu Yuan," Lai Kongyang muttered to himself. Carefully recalling Chu Mu's information, his interest increased by a bit, and he even had a bit of battle intent. However, 50% sword intent. Ao Xingyun's hand gripped the hilt of his sword, trembling slightly. His heart was filled with excitement. "It's actually 50% sword intent, 2% higher than mine." Ao Xingyun's sword intent was 30%, Lu Yuan's sword intent was 50%, and the sword intent Chu Mu displayed was also 50%. A sword grandmaster could control the power of the sword force. 1%, 10%, or even 100% could be controlled freely. However, sword intent couldn't. Sword intent was much more mysterious and illusory than sword force. It was already inconceivable for a sword Grand Master to be able to comprehend sword intent. To be able to control the output of sword intent, that was just wishful thinking. In other words, the amount of sword intent one had comprehended would be the amount of sword intent displayed. It couldn't be strengthened or weakened. Therefore, no one doubted whether Chu Mu still had any hidden sword intent. Possessing sword intent was already shocking enough, not to mention that it had reached 50%. I take back what I said just now. You have the qualifications to make me use my full strength, Lu Yuan said excitedly. At the same time, he felt a bit depressed. He had taken back what he said just now, and now he had to take it back again. Even with his temperament, he couldn't help but feel his cheeks heat up. Soon, the trace of embarrassment and depression in his heart disappeared. Holding the sword in his hand tightly, the sword intent that gushed out seemed to be even sharper. It turned into an invisible sword, ignoring the distance between space and time, and directly slashed towards Chu Mu. Sword intent was invisible. Not only was its power many times stronger than sword force, it could also cut through the void. It was rumored that those who possessed sword intent would be invulnerable to all evils and wouldn't be affected by inner demons because sword intent could kill them. Facing the impact of Lu Yuan's sword intent, Chu Mu didn't show any weakness. His sword intent also turned into an invisible sword and slashed towards Lu Yuan. It was a silent collision, and the killing intent was awe-inspiring. The air in the arena was pushed away, and a formless vacuum was formed under the impact of the sword intent. In the next breath, a large amount of air flowed backwards, like 100 rivers flowing into the sea. There was a loud explosion, and the momentum was horrifying. 50% sword intent, no difference in strength. Lu Yuan and Chu Mu's robes fluttered in the wind, as if they were going to be blown away by the wind. Take my sword, Lu Yuan growled. The impact of the sword intent was only to pave the way for his sword skill. Endless golden light shot out from the sword in Lu Yuan's hand, shooting into the sky. The entire arena seemed to have turned into a golden ocean. Even the audience who were far away could feel the sharpness of the golden light that filled the arena. It was as if their bodies were going to be pierced through. It contained 100% of the piercing mentality. In the blink of an eye, the golden light that filled the arena shrank and turned into sword lights that were 1/2 meter long and as thick as a finger. They hovered around Lu Yuan and coiled around him as if they were protecting his swords. There were a total of 10 golden sword lights. Lu Yuan held the long sword in his hand with a serious look on his face. The qi around him was fluctuating violently. It seemed like performing this attack was a burden on him. Chu Mu's pupils shrank. From the 10 golden sword lights, Chu Mu could feel the sharpness. Each of the sword lights was formed by the peak of Qi Hai's gold element sword qi. Not only did it contain 100% of the piercing mentality, it also contained 5% of the sword intent. It was extremely powerful, and was at least a few times more powerful than the sky-shattering sword attack. From this, it could be seen that there was a huge difference in power between sword artists who didn't understand the sword intent. This attack, could it be the new sword skill that Lu Yuan was talking about? The Hidden Dragon Sword Palace's Wang Palace leader thought to himself with his eyes wide open. Lai Kongyang also showed an interested expression. They could all feel the power of this sword skill. At the same time, there were only a few people who could see the flaws of this sword skill. Chu Mu, I will remember your name, because you will be the first person to make me perform this new sword skill. At the same time, you will also be the first person to be defeated by this new sword skill. Lu Yuan's voice was extremely low, and it sounded like the clanging of metal. His eyes shone with a golden light that could pierce through steel. Remember, my new sword technique is the first form of the heaven-sundering sword technique. 10 blades. 10 blades, Chu Mu repeated in a low voice. He looked at the 10 golden sword lights around Lu Yuan and nodded. This name was very normal, but it was quite appropriate. If that's the case, then let me see the power of these 10 blades. As you wish. Lu Yuan's voice was even lower. He couldn't hold on for too long. As he waved his long sword, it was as if there was an invisible mountain pressing down on his sword. Lu Yuan's movements were very slow and strenuous. In the next moment, as Lu Yuan waved his long sword, a golden sword light broke through the air and shot towards Chu Mu. Immediately after, a second golden sword light shot out. The third beam, the fourth beam, the fifth beam. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 469. The golden radiance rapidly enlarged in front of his eyes as Chu Mu slashed out with his sword. A clanging sound rang out and sparks flew. The golden radiance was shattered by Chu Mu's sword. Chu Mu felt the demon-slaying sword vibrate violently and almost flew out of his hand. The second golden radiance broke through the air and almost connected with the first golden radiance. Chu Mu had no choice but to use the flying swan illusory sky steps to dodge. The third, fourth, and fifth golden radiance flew over in an extremely dangerous manner. Under the flying swan illusory sky steps, Chu Mu's figure flew like a spirit in the clouds. The golden radiance tore through Chu Mu's protective sword chi and almost flew past his body. Chu Mu could feel the threatening sharpness of the golden radiance. It was as if it was going to pierce through his body, causing his hair to stand on end. The golden radiance missed and paused in midair. It was as if they were pulled by an invisible rope and changed their direction, once again shooting towards Chu Mu. Landing on the ground, he swung the demon-slaying sword and 5 sword shadows broke through the air. It was as if Chu Mu had swung 5 swords at the same time, breaking apart the 5 sword radiance. Chu Mu only felt that his palm was being violently shaken, as if it was going to split open. It was extremely painful. One had to know that after he had cultivated the first level of the heavenly desolate sword physique, all aspects of his body had improved by at least 10 times. Furthermore, he had used the force dissipation technique to dissipate most of the force. Under such circumstances, he still felt that his palm was about to split open. This was enough to show how powerful the golden radiance was. Lu Yuan's face was solemn. His eyes flashed with a strong golden radiance as he controlled the 5 golden radiance to attack Chu Mu from afar. The 5 golden rays were even more nimble than fish in the water. They changed unpredictably and went straight for Chu Mu. They came from every angle, splitting and splitting. Sometimes they formed a straight line to attack Chu Mu, while other times they attacked Chu Mu from 5 different angles. Lu Yuan's control over the 5 golden rays was extremely high, but at the same time, it was very taxing on his mind. The other 5 rays of golden light hovered around Lu Yuan, protecting him like loyal guards. Everyone could see that Lu Yuan still had some strength left. The 5 rays of golden light had already forced Chu Mu into a difficult situation. If all 10 rays of golden light were released, they would definitely be able to defeat Chu Mu. No one realized that their thoughts had changed. Originally, they thought that Chu Mu wouldn't be a match for Lu Yuan's sword. But now, they thought that Lu Yuan would have to go all out in order to defeat Chu Mu. Chu Mu once again deflected the 5 golden rays that shot towards him at almost the same time. Now that he had grasped the pattern, he didn't suffer much of an impact this time. Very powerful, at least 3 times stronger than the stone-shaking wave sword. Unfortunately, this sword technique has too many flaws. After a few exchanges, Chu Mu could see the flaws of the 10 blades. If it's perfected, its power can be increased by at least 10 times. If its power was increased by another 10 times, then Chu Mu would definitely lose this time. Unfortunately, there were no ifs. A true sword skill was a framework that required various components. Sword chi, concept, and sword force were all indispensable. Apart from sword chi, concept, and sword force were all on the same level of power. As for sword chi, from a certain perspective, it should be on the same level as the mentality and sword aura. If it was higher than the mentality and sword aura, then it would be even better. If it was lower than the mentality and sword aura, then it would affect the true power of the sword technique. For example, once a sword artist reached the chi high realm, he would naturally be able to understand the mentality and sword aura. It was like an accessory. Therefore, the sword technique created based on the mentality and sword aura would need to be at the chi high realm to be able to release its full power. Of course, if one used the sword aura of the astral realm to activate the sword technique, then its power would increase by a few fold. However, the sword aura was much more powerful than the sword chi. It would not be able to achieve a balance with the sword aura and sword aura. In the end, it would destroy the integrity of the sword technique and make it less smooth. With the same logic, the 10 blades was a powerful sword technique created based on the sword aura. It needed to be at the same level as the sword aura in order to be able to achieve a balance. Naturally, that would be the sword aura and the mentality. When one reached the astral realm, the sword chi would turn into sword aura. When the mentality reached the completion stage, it would reach a higher level called profound. In other words, for the 10 blades sword technique to be complete, it would need to be a combination of sword aura, profound, and sword intent. Right now, the 10 blades was only a combination of 5% sword aura, and mentality. It was also a combination that was forcefully combined. There was no technique to speak of. In other words, it could not be considered a sword technique. It was just an outline of a sword technique that was forcefully combined. Even so, this sword technique's embryonic form had 3 times the power of the stone-shaking wave sword. And this was under the condition that the 5% sword aura had not been fully utilized. Lu Yuan should know this as well, but he had no way to solve it right now. The mentality was easier to comprehend than the sword aura. Therefore, many sword artists who had comprehended the mentality could not comprehend the sword aura. However, the profound and sword intent were different. After reaching the peak of the sword aura, as long as one had enough talent and some luck, it was not impossible to comprehend the sword intent. As for the profound, there was a strict rule that one had to reach the 9th transformation realm first. Every time a swordsman made a breakthrough in his cultivation, it was a metamorphosis from his spirit to his body. Every metamorphosis was a sublimation of his life essence. Comprehending the sword intent required a strong perception. Although comprehending the profound was partially dependent on talent, it still required a sublimation of one's life essence. The 9th transformation realm was the starting point for comprehending the profound. Before reaching the 9th transformation realm, no matter who it was, no matter how monstrous, they would not be able to comprehend the profound. This was the iron rule. Otherwise, Lai Kong Yang and the others who had comprehended the mentality to completion would have already comprehended the profound. Chu Mu kept dodging and shattering the 5 golden lights, absorbing the pitiful advantages within them for his own use. Seeing that the 5 golden lights could not do anything to Chu Mu, Lu Yuan clenched his teeth and waved his longsword. The other 5 golden lights around him trembled and shot out one after another. Using all of his strength, Lu Yuan's forehead was covered in sweat. His face was pale, and he clenched his teeth as if he was under great pressure. Under Lu Yuan's control, the 10 golden streaks connected and shot into the sky. Like a dragon swimming in a circle, their speed was extremely fast. They circled around Lu Yuan's back and floated above Lu Yuan, locking onto Chu Mu like a dragon emerging from the water. Chu Mu, take my strongest move! Lu Yuan roared. The veins on the back of his hand that was holding the sword were bulging. Even his palm was trembling. He waved his longsword, and the golden sword light shot towards Chu Mu with a terrifying sound. The air was pushed apart and countless ripples were created. Lu Yuan, since you've used all of your strength, I can't hold back either. This move is a new sword skill that I've created recently. It's a sword skill that hasn't been completed yet, Chu Mu said seriously. The monster-slaying sword was suddenly covered in a layer of dark golden light. When everyone heard Chu Mu's words, they immediately straightened up, even though their bodies were already as straight as swords that pierced the sky. Although this sword skill hasn't been completed yet, I've already given it a name. It's called Moon Slashing. As soon as he finished speaking, the monster-slaying sword slashed forward. A dark golden crescent moon sword energy that was only a few meters long tore through the air and slashed forward. It looked very similar to the seismic wave sword, but it was much smaller, only a few meters long. However, the power it contained was more than 10 times that of the seismic wave sword. Moon slashing. This was the result of Chu Mu's sudden inspiration after comprehending the sword intent. It was also a brand new sword skill that was created through a special combination of sword intent, sword chi, mentality, and the seismic wave. This combination was different from Lu Yuan's forced combination. It was a combination that went with the flow. Therefore, it was more powerful than Lu Yuan's 10 blades. To be able to do this, one reason was due to Chu Mu's extremely powerful soul and comprehension ability. The other reason was due to the immense power of providence that he had. If not for the immense power of providence, Chu Mu would have needed at least a few months to reach this stage. There was a clear difference between an incomplete sword skill and a sword skill prototype. Now was the time to test the power of Chu Mu's incomplete sword skill. The dark golden crescent moon sword energy was unbelievably powerful. The air in front of it was first compressed and then torn apart, forming terrifying ripples that spread out. The power of each ripple was at the level of the seismic wave sword. Everyone's eyes were attracted by the dark golden crescent moon. In front of them, the world disappeared and fell into darkness. The dark golden crescent moon was like the only light, cutting through the dark sky and descending with destruction. The dark golden crescent moon collided with the golden light. Everyone felt as if there was a teeth-numbing crunch in their ears, as if a knife was slashing across glass. Lu Yuan's eyes widened, his eyeballs almost popped out of their sockets. He saw with his own eyes that the first ray of golden light was sliced apart by the dark golden crescent, followed by the second and third rays of golden light in less than a blink of an eye. Unable to block it, Lu Yuan could only watch as the 10 golden lights were cut in less than 1/100th of a second by the dark golden crescent moon. The dark golden crescent moon shrunk to half its original size and slashed towards Lu Yuan. Fast, too fast, and there was no way to dodge. Lu Yuan instinctively felt fear, the fear of death. He felt as if his throat was being choked, and he couldn't breathe. He had already used all his strength to perform the 10 blades. The power of the crescent moon was too terrifying. The aura that locked onto him made it difficult for Lu Yuan to move. In the next breath, Lu Yuan would be slashed by the dark golden crescent moon. With the power of the crescent moon, one could imagine that even if Lu Yuan had an extreme grade armor, he wouldn't be able to escape death. Lu Yuan knew this as well. He tried his best to dodge, but at this moment, his body didn't listen to him at all. The faces of the people from the Hidden Dragon Sword Palace changed drastically. The dark golden crescent moon was too fast, and they didn't even have time to save him. In the blink of an eye, the moment the dark golden crescent moon broke through Lu Yuan's protective sword chi, a sword light fell from the sky. With a pop, the dark golden crescent moon was shattered by the sword light, turning into countless dark golden light spots. Due to the inertia, they flew towards Lu Yuan and brushed past him, causing his black hair to dance wildly in the wind. Lu Yuan stood rooted to the ground, as if he was scared out of his wits. Chu Mu's face flashed with shock. Although the crescent moon was an incomplete sword skill, he knew how powerful it was. It was actually shattered by a sword light, and that sword light came from the sky. In other words, the one who made the move was Elder Long, to be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 470. Cutting Moon. This incomplete sword technique was displayed before everyone for the first time. After swallowing Lu Yuan's luck, Chu Mu's luck dragon increased significantly. It circled around his body, looking as lifelike as a true dragon. Lu Yuan, who managed to survive, still looked somewhat pale. He looked deeply at Chu Mu before looking at Lai Kongyang. Then, he left the sword arena without saying anything. The following battles were on a completely different level from the battle between Chu Mu and Lu Yuan. The two sides did not seem to be interested in the battles. The spectators were still immersed in the battle between Chu Mu and Lu Yuan, so the battles ended somewhat hastily. At night, Chu Mu cultivated quietly in his room, reflecting on his battle with Lu Yuan, reflecting on his shortcomings, comprehending his sword intent, state, and so on. When the day arrived, Chu Mu ended his night of cultivation. As he wished, his state of tearing had reached perfection. Chu Mu could feel that the perfected state of tearing was different from before. It was smoother and more natural. It was like a machine that had become complete and precise. Its might had clearly increased significantly. According to the previous rules, you should be fighting with Ao Xingyun in today's battle. Although Ao Xingyun is not as strong as Lai Kongyang, he is still very strong. You have to be careful, Bailey Jiang said seriously. The group arrived at the Heavenly Judgment Sword Arena. The 15th day's battle for luck started again. Perhaps due to yesterday's battles, Elder Long made some adjustments to today's battles. The first 48 battles had nothing to do with Chu Mu, Lai Kongyang, Lu Yuan, or Ao Xingyun. Everyone guessed that the battle between the four of them would be the finale. This was the only way to bring this year's battle for luck to a perfect end. The battles continued one after another. The other 9 sword heroes of the Great Kuan sword residence seemed to be on steroid. They fought bravely. Finally, the 48 battles ended. Without any rest, Elder Long announced the 49th battle of the day. Chu Mu vs. Ao Xingyun. One line sky. Startling heavenly sword. As soon as he attacked, Ao Xingyun released 30% of his sword intent and used his strongest sword skill, hoping to defeat Chu Mu. Ao Xingyun had watched the battle between Chu Mu and Lu Yuan very carefully. Although the difference between 5 and 3 parts sword intent wasn't the only deciding factor, the difference was still quite obvious. Ao Xingyun was deep in thought for the entire night. He replaced Lu Yuan and Chu Mu as his imaginary enemy. He fought again and again, but he always lost. Therefore, Ao Xingyun was holding on to a sliver of hope as he attacked with all his might. Under the influence of 30% sword intent, the power of the one line of sky and the heaven startling sword reached its peak. One line sky and heaven startling sword were Ao Xingyun's signature sword skills. Especially heaven startling sword, it was his ultimate move. However, although the one line of sky was supported by sword intent, it was more than 10 times cruder than the 10 blades. It was only twice as powerful as the seismic wave sword. As for the heaven startling sword, it was very close to the embryonic form of sword intent. It was nearly 3 times stronger than the seismic wave sword. As if he understood that these two sword skills couldn't do anything to Chu Mu, Ao Xingyun used a secret technique. With a boom, an incomparably dense sword chi burst out and soared into the sky. The aura it emitted was 30% more powerful. His black hair danced crazily as it soared into the sky. It seemed that even the 30% sword intent had increased a lot. His eyes flashed with a strong purple light as electric arcs covered his body. Crackling sounds could be heard as his aura filled the entire arena. Then, Ao Xingyun attacked again. It was still the one line of sky and the heaven startling sword, but its power was 30% more powerful. After attacking, Ao Xingyun's berserk aura relaxed. This was his strongest move. He had even used a secret technique to temporarily increase his strength. If he still couldn't do anything to Chu Mu, then there was no need to continue the battle. He estimated that he would have another battle soon. That battle would be even more important. He couldn't lose sight of one thing. Without using the moon-slashing sword, Chu Mu's combination of the seismic wave sword plus the sky-splitting sword and the flying swan illusory steps made Ao Xingyun's sword skills ineffective. I admit defeat. Ao Xingyun was very straightforward. After swallowing Ao Xingyun's power of fortune, Chu Mu's dragon of fortune exceeded 40 feet. Next was the 50th battle, Lai Kongyang versus Lu Yuan. The difference between the 10% sword intent and the 50% sword intent was even more obvious. Moreover, Lai Kongyang's accumulation was deeper than Lu Yuan's, and his talent was even higher. Soon, Lu Yuan was defeated. However, Lu Yuan's 10 blades also forced Lai Kongyang to use an incomplete sword skill based on his sword intent. Lai Kongyang's dragon of fortune also exceeded 40 feet, which was much longer than Chu Mu's. Tomorrow, the final battle, Elder Long said as his figure flashed and disappeared. The ripping mentality had already reached perfection. Chu Mu spent some time to comprehend Lai Kongyang's incomplete sword skill. In terms of power, it was very powerful. Under the influence of the 10% sword intent, it was far more powerful than the moon-slashing sword. Of course, if he used the 10% sword intent to drive the moon-slashing sword, its power would not be inferior. He spent another half of the time comprehending the sword intent, and the last half comprehending the cloud mentality. Compared to comprehending the ripping concept, the difficulty of comprehending the concept of cloud was much lower. It was much simpler. When the sun rose, Lin Ming's concept of cloud had reached 100% perfection. This rocket-like speed of comprehension made Chu Mu deeply addicted. Unfortunately, after today, he wouldn't have the chance to do so again. Chu Mu, today is the last day of the battle for fortune. Your real opponent is Lai Kongyang. On the way to the heaven-deciding sword field, Bailey Jiang he spoke with an unconcealable excitement. Lai Kongyang is very powerful. He is worthy of the title of Sword Hero. You just have to do your best. That's right. Chu Mu, you're still very young. Lai Kongyang is 10 years older than you, and he's an absolute genius. Losing to him isn't a big deal. Just treat the fight with him as a chance to temper yourself. The elders all spoke up to advise him, meaning that they had already determined that Chu Mu wasn't Lai Kongyang's opponent. Chu Mu nodded. He didn't explain or guarantee anything. He didn't know how strong Lai Kongyang was, and he didn't care if he won or lost in the end. He only cared about whether Lai Kongyang could force him to use his full power. Maybe he could, maybe he couldn't. He would only know in the end. Early in the morning, the heaven-deciding sword field was filled with people, and there were many discussions. Today's battle was much simpler than before. There were only 2 battles. However, these 2 battles were the most anticipated. Elder Long didn't purposely stir up the crowd's appetite. Once he arrived and the discussions quieted down, he announced the start of today's battle. First battle. Heaven-shocking sword hero Ao Xingyun versus heaven-breaking sword hero Lu Yuan. Everyone knew that this battle was for the 3rd place because the 2 of them had already been defeated by Chu Mu and Lai Kongyang. They had no fate with the 2nd and 1st place. The top 3 had a chance to enter the East Sage Hall to cultivate. The 3rd place was very important. On the sword battle arena, Lu Yuan and Ao Xingyun faced each other. The 2 of them were ranked 2nd and 3rd. However, from now on, they should be ranked 3rd and 4th because the super dark horse Chu Mu had caught up and surpassed them. 3-part sword intent and 5-part sword intent soared into the sky. At this time, they had to use their strength from the start to avoid being defeated because of their own carelessness. Even though they had seen each other's battle before, they still tried to attack each other a few times before using their full power. The difference in strength between Lu Yuan and Ao Xingyun wasn't very big. After both of them used their full strength, It was like a fierce battle between dragons and tigers. On the sword battle arena, sword light splashed and countless sparks flew. The two figures collided, and one could only vaguely see two blurry sword lights flickering. Close combat sword technique, long-range sword technique. With a boom, Ao Xingyun used his secret technique again, and his strength increased by 30%. A line of sky and heaven shocking sword were used again and again. Streaks of purple light swept across the sword battle arena. Lu Yuan should also have a secret technique to temporarily increase his strength, but he didn't use it. Instead, he used the first move of the heaven-breaking sword art, 10 blades. Of course, Lu Yuan also had a secret technique to temporarily increase his strength, but this kind of secret technique had side effects. Moreover, it was very taxing on the body. Under the circumstances of using the secret technique to increase his strength, he didn't have the confidence to use the 10 blade. Choosing between the two, he used the 10 blades sword technique. 5 golden lights flew across the sky. Ao Xingyun had no choice but to use the line of sky to knock them away. As if realizing that only 5 golden lights couldn't do anything to Ao Xingyun, Lu Yuan used the other 5 golden lights. After the battle with Chu Mu and Lai Kongyang, his control of the 10 blades had become more precise. Although the power didn't increase, it was more flexible. Chu Mu, what do you think? Ao Xingyun is still not Lu Yuan's opponent, Chu Mu said lightly. The situation was very obvious. Since Lu Yuan used the 10 blades, Ao Xingyun didn't have a chance to get close to Lu Yuan. He could only passively dodge and defend. Unless Ao Xingyun had a sword technique similar to the moon slashing sword, he couldn't do anything to Lu Yuan with just the line of sky and heaven shocking sword. In the end, he would only be defeated. In order to compete for the third place, Ao Xingyun used all his strength. His hair was disheveled and his eyes were red. He looked like he was fighting a bloody battle. Unfortunately, he lost because of the difference in strength in the end. The exciting battle had ended, but the hearts of the millions of spectators were instantly raised because the most exciting battle was about to begin. Sky-burning Sword Master Lai Kongyang vs. Zhen Tian Sword Master Chu Mu. One was a veteran sword master, the king of sword masters, and the other was a new sword master, a super dark horse. What kind of sparks would be created between them? I'm very surprised that my final opponent is you. Lai Kongyang's lips curled into a faint smile as he looked at Chu Mu and spoke neither quickly nor slowly. Even if you lose to my sword, I won't be surprised, Chu Mu replied. Good spirit. Lai Kongyang didn't get angry. He just smiled. In his opinion, Chu Mu's words were just to raise his aura. Among the sword masters, there was no one who could defeat him. With a boom, Lai Kongyang's sword intent rushed to the sky. He didn't hold back at all. Then, with another boom, Chu Mu's sword intent also rushed to the sky. 10%. Countless people were shocked. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 471. 10% Sword Intent. Lai Kongyang's expression froze as he repeated it in a low voice. His expression immediately changed as his pupils shrank to the size of needles. This was because he remembered that Chu Mu had used 5% sword intent against Lu Yuan and Ao Xingyun. In just one night, Chu Mu's sword intent had increased from 5% to 10%? No, it was definitely impossible. Lai Kongyang knew very well how difficult it was to comprehend the sword intent. Especially for sword artists like him who had comprehended the sword intent in the Qi High realm, the difficulty was 10 times higher. The reason why Lai Kongyang was able to comprehend the sword intent and reach 10% was because of his extreme talent, his 3 years of continuous hard work, and the last reason was because of the huge amount of luck he had right now. Before receiving the huge amount of luck, his sword intent had only reached 9%. After half a month, it had increased again and reached 10%, making it even more powerful. It should be known that the luck he had received was even more powerful than Chu Mu's. Even if Chu Mu's comprehension was higher than his, it was already not bad for him to be able to increase his sword intent by 1% in half a month. How could he increase it by 5% in one night? After eliminating this possibility, Lai Kongyang could only think of another shocking fact. Chu Mu could control the strength of his sword intent at will. Lai Kongyang almost exclaimed that this was impossible. Sword intent was much more powerful than sword aura and was much more illusory. Even most of the true realm sword artists could not control the strength of their sword intent at will. How could a mere Chi-Hai sword artist do it? This was not only what Lai Kongyang was thinking, but it was also what countless people present, including Elder Long, the sword of Gojoseon, were thinking. Elder Long looked at Chu Mu, and the more he looked, the more satisfied he was. He had already reported Chu Mu's information, but he did not expect that Chu Mu would exceed his expectations again. 10% sword intent. Chu Mu, this guy, really surprises me time and time again. Bailey Jiang, he gasped for breath. His voice was filled with excitement and depression, and his face was flushed because of excitement. Ha 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 ha. I admit that you have surprised me once again. You are qualified to make me use my true strength. Lai Kongyang suddenly roared with laughter, and his heroic spirit shot into the sky. He'd completely changed his casual and carefree appearance from before, and his battle intent mixed with sword insight shot into the sky, causing the wind and clouds to surge and shake the heavens and the earth. This was the true Lai Kongyang, the Burning Heaven sword hero. The previous him was just a disguise because he didn't have a strong enough opponent. The vast and boundless aura impacted the entire battle arena, but it was blocked by the seal. Because it was too powerful, it caused layers of ripples to spread out on the seal. Just the aura alone was able to achieve such an effect that other sword grandmasters would have to use their full strength to display their sword skills. It was extremely shocking. Chu Mu, who bore the brunt of the attack, did not move at all. Only his black hair and robes fluttered in the wind. There seemed to be a dark golden flame springing up in his eyes, rapidly growing larger and burning fiercely. Lai Kongyang's powerful aura finally aroused Chu Mu's raging fighting spirit. His sword intent seemed to have received a boost as it became even stronger and sharper. The two seemed to have a tacit understanding as they pulled out their swords at the same time. A dazzling red light shot through the air, condensing into a phoenix phantom that spread its wings and soared high into the sky. The terrifying heat wreaked havoc, and the temperature of the battle arena rose rapidly. In a breath's time, it had already reached over 1,000 degrees. Ordinary swordsmen would immediately die from dehydration if they stayed in the arena. A clear cry seemed to rush out of the heavenly dueling arena and resounded across the horizon. The huge phoenix phantom flapped its wings, causing a flaming storm that covered the sky, and then rushed towards Chu Mu. Dozens of meters away, Chu Mu could clearly feel the terrifying heat that was about to burn him to ashes. It was like a huge wave that was crazily surging towards him. Vaguely, Chu Mu seemed to smell something burning. Burning Phoenix Break. The incomplete sword skill of the Burning Heaven sword hero Lai Kongyang, and also the one that defeated Lu Yuan. It was a powerful sword skill based on 10% of sword intent. The heaven and earth seemed to be burned by the Phoenix Phantom. There was no place that wasn't scorching hot, and it could instantly melt steel. Then, the sky suddenly darkened, as if it had lost all light sources. Even the huge Phoenix Phantom was swallowed by the darkness. A dark golden light cut through the darkness, piercing through the sky, and a crescent moon rose. In an instant, the moon-slaying sword and the burning phoenix break collided. A mournful cry resounded through the heavenly dueling arena. The millions of spectators all covered their ears, and their faces were filled with pain. The sound was too sharp, and it was like a demon's voice piercing through the brain. The flames on the phoenix's body suddenly expanded, contracted, expanded again, and exploded with a boom. Countless flame shockwaves as thick as an arm wreaked havoc, carrying bits of broken dark gold, instantly covering the entire battle arena. The battle arena seemed to have turned into a sea of flames. The phoenix phantom disappeared, and so did the moon-slaying sword. The power of the two incomplete sword skills was about the same. Lai Kongyang and Chu Mu stood on the battle arena, allowing the flame shockwaves as thick as an arm to hit their bodies. Their feet did not move at all. The flame shockwaves mixed with broken dark gold hit their protective sword chi, and tore it apart in a few hits. They waved their long swords, and sword shadows appeared one after another, shattering countless flames. Some of the flames hit the seal of the battle arena, and immediately, countless clear ripples appeared. The power of each flame shockwave was above the stone-shaking wave sword. With a whoosh, Lai Kongyang broke through the flame shockwaves and rushed towards Chu Mu, thrusting his sword forward. This sword was too sudden, too fast, and unexpected. Chu Mu did not even have time to think before his sword was already thrusting towards his face. He instinctively leaned to the side, and the sharp sword wind swept past his ear. Chu Mu felt a tearing pain as if his ear was cut off, and a few strands of hair flew in the air. Attacking with his sword had long since become an instinct in Chu Mu's countless training sessions. Before Lai Kongyang could attack a second time, a sword light that seemed to come from nowhere appeared in front of his eyes, sweeping upwards. He quickly dodged, and only a slight sound could be heard. Lai Kongyang's sleeve fluttered like a butterfly. Sword, 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 and sword. There was no time to think at all. He was almost instinctively thrusting his sword, dodging his sword, and blocking his sword. Since he could not win with sword skills, Lai Kongyang chose to fight with sword skills in close combat. This sword skill was a basic sword skill, and not some ancient sword skill. Sword masters like them deeply understood the importance of walking their own path. They had long since abandoned the useless ancient sword skills, and only used the sword skills and basic sword skills that they had comprehended to fight their enemies. Although it was a basic sword skill, it contained a pure and dense sword chi and sword intent. The power of each sword was extremely terrifying, and because of the sword intent, the power of each sword was not below the stone-shaking wave sword. Its lethality was shocking. The protective sword chi of both sides was useless, as if it was just an illusion, and was instantly torn apart. The armor on their bodies did not even have the time to activate a protective shield, and even if it was activated, it would not be able to block such a sword attack. The battle between Chu Mu and Lai Kongyang was several times more dangerous than the battle between Chu Mu and Lu Yuan, because Lai Kongyang's sword skills were much more profound than Lu Yuan's. The two of them did not use any movement techniques, and only dodged with their instincts trained from life and death situations. It seemed like there were traces to follow, but in reality, it was impossible to predict where they would move next. Everything was adjusted according to the sword. Sword light flashed, and sword shadows flashed. The two swords became extremely blurry. The two figures moved at high speed but did not leave. Instead, they entangled with each other, and continuously counterattacked as they dodged. The sounds of splattering rang out continuously. Every sound was extremely sharp, and it spread out of the arena and into the ears of every spectator, causing their scalps to go numb and goosebumps to rise. The two swords collided, and blazing sparks flew into the sky. Everyone stared with their eyes wide open, and forgot to breathe. The entire arena was deathly silent. So this is his true strength. Lu Yuan stared with his eyes wide open, and his hands clenched into fists. He felt the blood in his body boil, but it immediately cooled down as if cold water had been poured over it. He felt a little depressed. With such sword skills, Chu Mu would have been able to completely defeat him in the previous battle. Chu Mu did not know about Lu Yuan's depression. He gradually recovered, and his powerful soul allowed him to replace his instincts and regain control of his body. Lai Kong Yang's sword style was very ordinary at the beginning, but it was very fast. Moreover, it was refined and simple, and there were no superfluous movements. Then, it slowly changed, and became a sword technique with extremely terrifying explosive power. With a stab, wind and thunder would explode, accompanied by a terrifyingly high temperature that wreaked havoc in the surroundings. Although the speed was reduced, the momentum was great, and the power was even stronger. After regaining control of his body, his powerful soul, and his many years of training in sword skills allowed Chu Mu to gradually feel the trajectory of Lai Kong Yang's sword. However, each of Lai Kong Yang's sword gave him a huge pressure, and under this pressure, Chu Mu gradually entered an ethereal state. It was as if the entire world had disappeared, and there was only a sword light in front of him like a bolt of lightning. Chu Mu suddenly stopped moving, and his entire body seemed to be rooted to the ground. Only the monster-slaying sword continued to swing out, stabbing, slicing, chopping, slashing, and lifting. All kinds of basic sword moves were perfectly displayed, and the speed was getting faster and faster. Lai Kong Yang suddenly realized that he was gradually being suppressed, even though he was about to gain the upper hand in the battle. The speed of his opponent's sword was getting faster and faster, and although the power of the sword did not increase, the increasing speed of the sword was starting to tire him out. He was slowly beginning to understand how Lu Yuan felt back then. Lai Kong Yang even realized that he felt like he was in a quagmire, and his sword skills were starting to lose. He wanted to escape, but he realized that every time he showed signs of escaping, Chu Mu's sword would immediately stab at him from an unbelievable angle, making it impossible for him to retreat. He had no choice but to respond. This feeling was as if he was being forced by Chu Mu to cultivate his sword skills. Thinking of this, Lai Kong Yang's heart surged with anger for no reason. As the king of sword heroes, he was being forced to become someone else's practice target. What kind of contempt was this? His anger exploded, and a boom sounded from Lai Kong Yang's body, and a terrifying aura exploded. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 472. Boom. A loud explosion shook the heavens. Terrifying flames suddenly gushed out from Lai Kong Yang's body, and the surrounding temperature instantly rose to a few thousand degrees. Chu Mu could feel the terrifying heat as if he was going to melt. In the blink of an eye, his body was sweating profusely and it all evaporated under the terrifying heat. The white robe on his body almost caught fire. If he hadn't used his sword aura to block the flames and retreated quickly, he would have been in a sorry state. His swordsmanship wasn't as good as Chu Mu's, so Lai Kong Yang had no choice but to use this move to force Chu Mu to retreat. With a whoosh, Chu Mu distanced himself from Lai Kong Yang and appeared a few dozen meters away. He looked at Lai Kong Yang with a solemn expression. The crimson flames burned fiercely, and Lai Kong Yang was enveloped by the flames. He was like a fiery demon that was bathed in flames as he wantonly emitted a terrifying heat that could melt steel instantly. The surrounding air was distorted, and Lai Kong Yang looked unreal. Trio of Burning Heavens. The palace master of the Great Qian Sword Residence let out a sigh of relief and had an expression of disbelief on his face. Chu Mu actually forced Kong Yang to use his trump card. The Trio of Burning Heavens was Lai Kong Yang's trump card. It was the most powerful secret technique that he possessed. At the same time, it was also the reason why he was called the Burning Heavens Sword Hero. As the name suggested, the Trio of Burning Heavens had 3 levels. It was a fire-type secret technique. The first level could increase the power of the fire type by 30%, the second level by 60%, and the third level by 100%. Moreover, this secret technique had a special characteristic. When it was used at the first level, it would cause a huge burden on the body and there would be side effects later on. However, when it was used at the second level, the burden and side effects would be halved. When it was used at the third level, the burden and side effects would be halved again. In other words, the trio of burning heavens was a secret technique that would increase the power of the technique and reduce the side effects as it was cultivated to a higher level. It was extremely precious. Now, Lai Kong Yang was using the first level of the trio of burning heavens, red flames burning heavens. Lai Kong Yang specialized in the fire element. Although his fire concept hadn't mutated, it had already reached the perfection level. His usage of fire concept was much better than other sword heroes. Now, under the amplification of the Burning Heaven trio, its power had increased by 30%, making it even more terrifying. Within the red flames, Lai Kong Yang's eyes were also burning fiercely. He had his own considerations as to why he had chosen the Burning Heaven trio as his trump card. Chu-Mu was really strong. There was no doubt about that. Although Chu-Mu's sword aura was only at the late stage of the Qi High Realm, and the difference between him and the peak of the late stage of the Qi High Realm was very obvious, after the exchange, Lai Kong Yang discovered that Chu-Mu's sword aura's density and purity was not much inferior to his own. Lai Kong Yang had cultivated an earth-level upper-rank sword Qi art, and it had been refined by many people over and over again. From this point, it meant that Chu-Mu's sword Qi art was of a higher quality than his. It was very likely to be a top-rank earth-level sword Qi art. That sword Qi was even weirder. It contained a corrosive power that could corrode his sword Qi to a certain extent and weaken its power. Because of all these factors, his advantage in terms of sword Qi cultivation was reduced to almost nothing. Sword Qi? He had 10% sword Qi, and so did Chu-Mu. Sword skill? He had the incomplete Burning Phoenix Break, which was based on sword Qi. Chu-Mu also had the incomplete Cutting Moon Sword, which was based on sword Qi. Sword skill? His swordsmanship was indeed profound and powerful. However, Chu-Mu's swordsmanship was even more profound and powerful than his. It was unimaginable. Even Lai Kong Yang himself couldn't imagine how there could be such a person in the world. Such a monstrous genius that made him lose all his advantages. He was only 23 years old. Lai Kong Yang couldn't help but think back to when he was 23 years old, when he had just received the title of Sword Hero. Although he was quite powerful back then, compared to the current Chu-Mu, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. He thought back to how he had looked down on Chu-Mu and thought that he was just a young man with decent strength. Who would have thought that the current situation would be like this? It wasn't that Lai Kong Yang wasn't powerful. Just seeing how easily he had defeated Lu Yuan and Ao Xingyun, and how the other sword heroes didn't even have the courage to attack, was enough to show how terrifying he was. Lai Kong Yang was powerful, but so was Chu-Mu. In fact, Chu-Mu was even more powerful. In the end, Chu-Mu had forced Lai Kong Yang to unleash his full strength and use his secret technique. Lai Kong Yang was a proud person. After being crowned the king of sword heroes, he became even more proud. Therefore, he wouldn't allow anyone to defeat him, especially a young swordsman who was younger than him by more than 10 years. This was no longer a fight for the first place in the Battle of Providence. It was a fight for the king of sword heroes in the Eastern Sword region. Lai Kong Yang wouldn't allow this title, which had been on his head for many years, to be taken away by someone else. He had to win, and he had to win beautifully. Thinking of this, Lai Kong Yang clenched his teeth and the scarlet flames in his eyes started to change. Gradually, a tinge of green started to spread. When the flames in his eyes turned completely green, the blazing red flames on his body also began to change. Traces of green appeared, and as time passed, more and more of the green color appeared. It seemed like a long time, but in fact, Lai Kong Yang had already made his decision in just a few breaths' time. Moreover, most of the flames on his body had turned green. The Sword Mansion master of the Great Qian Sword Mansion was stunned. Then, his face turned solemn. He didn't expect Lai Kongyang to not only perform the Burning Heavens trio, but also perform the second stage. It seemed like Chu Mu was giving him a lot of pressure. The second stage of the Burning Heavens trio was naturally much more powerful than the first stage. At the same time, the burden and side effects on the body were also smaller. However, it had a disadvantage, which was that it consumed a lot of energy. In other words, Lai Kongyang couldn't sustain the consumption of the second stage of the Burning Heavens trio for a long time. He didn't have much time left. After 3 breaths' time, the flames on Lai Kongyang's body turned completely green. The second stage of the Burning Heavens trio, green flames burning heavens. Instantly, Chu Mu felt that the terrifying heat, which made it difficult for him to get close to Lai Kongyang, had disappeared. However, Chu Mu's expression became even more solemn. The heat didn't disappear. Instead, it was being absorbed into the green flames. This meant that the temperature of the green flames on Lai Kongyang's body was even higher than before. It was even more terrifying. The current Lai Kongyang was even more powerful. The 60% increase in the power of the fire element was almost terrifying. Chu Mu let out a heavy sigh. The current Lai Kongyang was indeed very terrifying. His strength was much stronger than before. However, Yi Shiwen still had the opportunity to get close to him. Just now, the flames on Lai Kongyang's body were too hot. If Chu Mu had gotten close, he would have had to divert part of his strength to resist the terrifying heat. This would have caused his strength to decrease imperceptibly, and he would be at a disadvantage in the battle against Lai Kongyang. Of course, Chu Mu was also confident that he wouldn't be defeated by Lai Kongyang's sword. It was just that he would be in a more difficult situation. Lai Kongyang obviously understood this point as well. However, he still chose to use the second stage of the Burning Heavens trio. He wanted to defeat Chu Mu with absolute strength. He didn't want both of them to suffer. If it wasn't for the fact that he hadn't mastered the third stage of the Burning Heavens trio and couldn't complete it, he would have directly used the third stage to increase his strength. As he swung his sword, Lai Kongyang once again used the incomplete sword skill, Burning Phoenix Break. A sharp and clear cry resounded through the heavens and earth. The illusion of a phoenix appeared once again. It seemed to be clearer than before. Moreover, this phoenix was completely green. The green flames burned fiercely, but the surroundings couldn't feel any heat. Everyone knew that this was because the high temperature was all concentrated in the green flames. Once one was hit by the green phoenix, the outcome would be absolutely terrifying. They would instantly turn into ashes. The green phoenix illusion rushed towards Chu Mu with a boom. It shook the void and burned the heavens and earth. Chu Mu slashed out a crescent moon. As expected, the collision between the crescent moon and the burning phoenix break ended with the crescent moon shattering. The green phoenix illusion, which had shrunk by 30%, still rushed towards Chu Mu at an even faster speed. The green phoenix illusion quickly enlarged in front of Chu Mu. Chu Mu once again swung his sword and attacked with the crescent moon. After a short pause, he once again slashed out with the crescent moon. After 2 consecutive crescent moon attacks, the green phoenix illusion was finally destroyed. It turned into green flames that filled the sky. Chu Mu hurriedly used the flying swan illusory steps to dodge. The green flames landed on the ground. Instantly, the seal was burned through. The hard floor was burned through like bubbles. Countless ripples appeared on the seal in the surroundings. It was so dense that it was like a rainstorm falling into a calm lake. It made people worry if the seal would be broken. The burning phoenix break, the second movement of the Burning Heaven trio, was so powerful that it made countless people gasp. They were worried for Chu Mu. Lai Kongyang in this state was too terrifying. Lai Kongyang knew that he didn't have much time left. He had to make good use of it. Once again, he attacked with the Burning Phoenix Break. Burning Phoenix Break was his most powerful sword skill. As Forb Flame Cut and the Cyan Flame Cut, they were just sword skills created based on the sword momentum. Although they were more powerful with 10% of sword intent, they were still incomparable to Burning Phoenix Break. The Green Phoenix illusion appeared again. Countless people's hearts almost stopped beating. They all looked at Chu Mu nervously. Chu Mu hastily used Fei Hong illusory space steps to quickly move. The second level of Fei Hong illusory space steps seemed to be advancing and retreating. However, he discovered that the Cyan Phoenix seemed to be able to determine whether it was real or fake. It wasn't confused at all as it charged towards Chu Mu. Chu Mu's speed was extremely fast. The Green Phoenix illusion was also very fast. It locked onto Chu Mu from afar. No matter how Chu Mu dodged, it didn't show any signs of missing. It was as if it was a real phoenix. Lai Kongyang stared at Chu Mu. The green flames in his eyes burned fiercely. Immediately after, he waved his sword again. Another green phoenix illusion condensed under the sword. It spread its wings and soared into the sky. After a turn, it locked onto Chu Mu and swooped down. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 473. Lai Kongyang seemed to feel that this was not enough. He waved his sword again, and a third Cyan Phoenix shadow appeared. It spread its wings and rushed out, circling around and attacking Chu Mu from the side. From the left, from the right, and from the sky, there was a Cyan Phoenix shadow rushing out from 3 different directions. The people of the Great Kuan Sword Palace immediately turned pale and stood up one by one. Even though they knew that Elder Long would save Chu Mu at the most crucial moment, they were still worried. The Cyan Phoenix's terror was unimaginable. Not to mention being hit, even the slightest bit of impact would cause one to be severely injured. Elder Long was also prepared. His eyes flickered as he stared below. Once Chu Mu was in danger, he would immediately intervene. Otherwise, the Eastern Sword region would suffer a great loss. Seeing that Chu Mu was about to be hit by the 3 Cyan Phoenix shadows, the cyan flame in Lai Kongyang's eyes flickered and dimmed as if it was about to be extinguished. A smile also appeared on his face. He knew that Chu Mu had nowhere to run. Perhaps his footwork was amazing, but he would not be able to avoid the pursuit of the 3 Phoenix shadows. Lai Kongyang was 100% confident about this. He also knew that Chu Mu wouldn't die. In fact, he wouldn't even be injured. However, that didn't matter, because as long as he defeated Chu Mu, everything would be fine. This was him defeating Chu Mu with absolute strength. The crown of Sword Hero King would still be on his head. After this, he would break through to the Qi High Realm. Because he had accumulated enough strength, Lai Kongyang felt that he could no longer suppress it. Therefore, he wanted to defeat Chu Mu with absolute strength and let the Eastern Sword region know that his position as the King of Sword Heroes was unshakable. He wanted to break through the Qi High Realm and enter the 9th Transformation Realm. When that time came, he would be able to break through the 9th Transformation Realm and reach the Origin Realm faster. Only then would he be qualified to enter the Central Sword region again and compete with the true young swordsman. Chu Mu was only a stepping stone for him to break through. Everyone from the Great Qian Sword Mansion clenched their fists tightly as excitement filled their faces. With Lai Kongyang's victory, this year's Battle of Providence would come to an end. Just like the previous years, the Great Qian Sword Mansion would emerge victorious. Not only would this allow the Great Qian Sword Mansion to obtain more power of providence, it would also greatly motivate the Great Qian Sword Mansion. This would motivate the Great Qian Sword Mansion's students to work even harder in their cultivation and improve by leaps and bounds. As expected, compared to Lai Kongyang, Chu Mu is still not enough. Although Chu Mu is extremely talented, he doesn't have enough time. The spectators all sighed. Although the Eastern Sage Hall Palace Master and the others who were hiding in the shadows didn't say anything, their thoughts were more or less the same. They felt that this time around, Chu Mu would definitely lose. However, they all thought that Chu Mu was too young, and that he had only become a sword hero for a short period of time. If he had become a sword hero a few years earlier, the chances of him defeating Lai Kongyang would have been much higher. However, this didn't affect Chu Mu's position in their hearts. As expected, Chu Mu gave up on dodging. He stood on the spot as if he was going to let the 3 green phoenixes attack him. Lai Kongyang, you are indeed very strong, Chu Mu said softly with a sincere smile on his face. In the next moment, just when everyone thought that Chu Mu would definitely lose and Elder Long was about to make a move, there was a loud boom that seemed to shake the heavens and earth. What? Impossible! This can't be real! All sorts of exclamations rang out uncontrollably. Every single one of them was extremely sharp. Their eyes were wide open, and the smile on Lai Kongyang's face froze. The green flames in his eyes were at their weakest, and they were filled with disbelief. What was that? Sword intent. Chu Mu was bursting with sword intent that soared into the heavens. They already knew that Chu Mu possessed sword intent, and Lai Kongyang had also personally experienced it. However, at this moment, Chu Mu wasn't bursting with 10% sword intent, but 12%. When he attacked, 3 dark golden crescent moons that were a few meters long tore through the air and slashed towards the left, right, and top. 3 crescent moons. With popping sounds, the 3 green phoenixes were all shattered by the crescent moons. After they were shattered, the crescent moons exploded and turned into a dark golden membrane that blocked the impact of the green flames. In the end, the green flames and dark golden flames disappeared without a trace. This. Lai Kongyang stared at Chu Mu in a daze. The green flames on his body rose and fell, just like his current mood. Elder Long released his sword fingers and a smile appeared on his old-fashioned face. The people from the East Sanctuary also secretly heaved a sigh of relief. At the same time, they paid more attention to Chu Mu. The people from the Great Kuan Sword Palace also heaved a sigh of relief. However, their bodies were tense and their blood was boiling. If not for the occasion, they would have already shouted loudly. 12% sword intent. Chu Mu shouldn't lose, right? Bailey Jiang said after a long time. However, the word win kept lingering in his heart, as if it was about to rush out. The difference between a 12% sword intent and a 10% sword intent was very obvious. Originally, Chu Mu wanted to hold back, but Lai Kongyang was too strong, so he couldn't hold back. A 12% crescent moons could break the green phoenix's shadows and block the impact of the green flames, so Chu Mu wasn't affected at all. Lai Kongyang, I will defeat you in your strongest state and make you accept your loss wholeheartedly, Chu Mu said firmly as he waved the monster-slaying sword and pointed it at Lai Kongyang. Let's see how you will defeat me, Lai Kongyang shouted. The green flames on his body, which were almost extinguished, sprang up like oil was poured on them. They burned fiercely as if they wanted to burn the sky. Lai Kongyang was very clear that the green flames around him were terrifyingly hot. Not only did they possess terrifying might, but they were also the best defense. Even if the crescent moons struck him, the crescent moons would be destroyed by the sky-burning green flames and would not be able to deal any real damage to Lai Kongyang. Even a peak-grade sword would soften under such terrifyingly high temperatures. After some time, it would turn into red-hot iron. Once the sky-burning triplet reached the 3rd layer, the flames could directly melt a peak-grade sword into molten iron. Whoosh! Chu Mu's figure seemed to be retreating. However, he was actually charging at Lai Kongyang at an extremely fast speed. His movements were as unpredictable as a white cloud, unpredictable. In just a flash, Chu Mu appeared before Lai Kongyang. Lai Kongyang stared straight at Chu Mu. Right now, he was using all his strength to activate the sky-burning triplet secret technique. He did not have any energy left to counterattack or dodge. He could only passively endure Chu Mu's incoming attack. However, Lai Kongyang believed that with the sky-burning green flames, Chu Mu's attack would not be effective. If his sword pierced into the green flames, not to mention whether the sword would soften, just the terrifying heat alone would make Chu Mu unable to hold the sword. Lai Kong Yang, accept your defeat, Chu Mu said in a low voice as he stabbed forward with the monster-slaying sword. It was an ordinary stab that did not seem to have any energy fluctuations. Lai Kong Yang could not help but feel puzzled. The spectators were also puzzled. Only Elder Long, who was in the air, was startled at first, then his expression changed greatly. This was because he could vaguely feel the terrifying power contained in Chu Mu's stab. It was a power that had been compressed to the extreme. It was all compressed within the sword, as if it had become one with the sword when it was forged. Elder Long believed that once this power was unleashed, its might could only be described with the word terrifying. The stab just happened to stop outside the sky-burning green flames. The tip of the sword had only touched the flames for a brief moment, but Chu Mu felt a terrifying heat quickly spread from the tip of the sword to the body of the sword. At the same time, an indescribable power pierced through the sky-burning green flames, directly piercing through Lai Kong Yang's protective sword qi. It then struck the supreme quality armor on Lai Kong Yang's body, right where his heart was. An uncontrollable groan rang out. Lai Kong Yang only felt as if his heart had been pierced by a sharp sword. Intense pain spread through his entire body. His body swayed and he lost consciousness. His vision turned black, and the green flames in his eyes extinguished. The sky-burning green flames on his body also went out in the blink of an eye due to his loss of control. Blood leaked from the corner of his mouth as Lai Kong Yang staggered back a few steps, barely managing to stand firm. He stared with great effort and his vision was blurry. After a while, this incomparably uncomfortable feeling finally disappeared. However, there was still an incomparable pain in his heart, and even breathing was difficult. What is this sword skill called? Lai Kong Yang asked with a slightly hoarse voice. Point kill, Chu Mu replied indifferently. Point kill. Thank you for showing mercy. Lai Kong Yang still said with difficulty in his hoarse voice. He covered his chest with one hand and didn't dare to breathe too hard. You win. You are the new sword hero king. Lai Kong Yang's expression and voice were filled with unconcealable loneliness. As his voice fell, Chu Mu's fate dragon rushed out from his body and pounced onto Lai Kong Yang's body. When it rushed out again, its length broke through again, nearing 15 meters. When the nearly 15-meter-long fate dragon returned to Chu Mu's side, it didn't enter Chu Mu's body. Instead, it coiled around Chu Mu's body and quickly rushed up into the sky. When it reached the highest altitude, the fate dragon raised its head and let out a dragon's roar that resounded throughout the heaven-deciding sword arena. Following that, a fate dragon condensed on each of the 99 sword heroes. For those sword heroes with too little fate, their fate dragons were not only small, but also blurry, as if they would scatter with the wind. As if a king had given the order, each of the 99 fate dragons spat out 1% of their own fate power, and all of them flew towards the fate dragon in the sky above the arena. Chu Mu's fate dragon quickly swam and swallowed all 99 fate powers. Its body rapidly expanded, and in the blink of an eye, it was more than 15 meters long, and then even longer. Finally, Chu Mu's fate dragon reached nearly 15 meters long. After circling in the sky once, it rushed down and rushed into Chu Mu's body. Lai Kong Yang slowly walked down the arena, and his back seemed a little bleak. The heaven-deciding sword arena was silent. Most of the people looked at Lai Kong Yang's figure, and then at Chu Mu with some reverence. They knew that from now on, the sword hero king of the eastern sword region was no longer Lai Kong Yang, but Chu Mu. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 474. The 10 heavenly luck swords hovered motionlessly in the air. Each of the 100 sword heroes had a clear or blurry luck dragon circling around them. They soared into the sky and quickly charged at the 10 heavenly luck swords. The luck of the sword heroes of the different sword palaces rushed into the heavenly luck swords of their respective sword palaces. In the blink of an eye, the 10 heavenly luck swords turned into 10 luck dragons. 10, 130 meters. Bailey Jianghe's eyes widened as his body trembled. He stammered with great difficulty. The elders could not say a word as their throats moved with difficulty. Chen Bu-er's eyes, which had been squinting, also opened. They were filled with shock. 130 meters. No, to be precise, 130 meters long luck dragon was soaring above the heaven-extinguishing sword field, letting out soul-shaking dragon roars. 10 meters. Chu Mu smiled from the bottom of his heart. The enormous power of fortune leaving his body made him feel empty all of a sudden, as if he had been hollowed out. Fortunately, his adaptability was extremely strong and he quickly adapted to it. The enormous mental strength produced by his powerful soul made him feel that the power of fortune he possessed seemed to have increased. He knew that the feeling of growth was real. It was due to the massive power of providence he had received over the past 16 days, nourishing the sliver of power of providence he possessed. Although the growth was not much, it was enough to double Chu Mu's power of providence. The other sword hero's luck dragon had more or less been nourished as well. However, it was not as obvious as Chu Mu's. The weakest sword heroes did not feel any growth at all. Although I did not obtain first place, I still obtained third place. From now on, the Great Koan Sword Palace's declining situation should change and gradually return to its former glory. Chu Mu glanced at the luck dragons that were 130 meters long and muttered to himself. Thinking about it, for the past 60 years, the Great Koan Sword Palace had always been at the bottom. Previously, their luck dragon had only been 40 meters long. However, this time, it had reached 130 meters long. It had grown by more than 20 meters. Chu Mu alone had obtained nearly 6 feet of destiny power, and the other 9 sword heroes had obtained more than 5 feet of destiny power. Speaking of which, other than Chu Mu, the other 9 sword heroes of the Great Koan Sword Mansion were unable to obtain the power of providence of more than 5 feet. It was all because of Chu Mu's repeated defeats and consecutive victories against strong opponents. This greatly motivated the 9 sword heroes, causing them to be filled with fighting spirit in every battle. They completely disregarded their own injuries and unleashed 120% of their strength. This year's War of Providence had ended with the Great Koan Sword Estate coming in third place. The Great Qian Sword Estate was still in first place, but they weren't happy at all. It was because the Great Koan Sword Mansion had made a comeback, because Lai Kongyang had been defeated, and because Chu Mu had won consecutively and eventually replaced Lai Kongyang as the Sword Hero King of the Eastern Sword region. When we return to the Sword Mansion, we will hold a celebratory feast for you. Bailey Jiang he waved his hand and laughed loudly. His laughter contained excitement that he could not and did not want to hide, as well as a trace of sorrow and detachment that were hidden deeply. Everyone knew the difference between great sorrow and great joy. After everything ended, the heavenly fortune sword returned to Chen Bu-er's body and disappeared. The vast power of providence also disappeared without a trace. The people of the Great Koan Sword Mansion didn't leave immediately. Instead, they entered the Great Koan Garden. Chu Mu, this time, it was all thanks to you. An elder was extremely excited. You can't say that. Without the 9 senior brothers, I wouldn't have been able to do much by myself, Chu Mu said with a smile. No, junior brother Chu. If you hadn't incited our fighting spirit with your consecutive victories, our morale would have been low and we would have lost even more miserably, Jiang Liken said with a smile. I'll go borrow the East Sage Palace's array and send the news back to the Sword Mansion first, Bailey Jiang he said with a smile. He believed that when the Great Koan Sword Mansion's Mansion Master and the other elders heard this good news, they would definitely be extremely excited. After some time, the 10 elders and Chen Bu left one after another. Chu Mu and the other 9 sword heroes remained in the pavilion in the middle of the lake in the great koan garden. They drank wine and discussed the battle for Providence. They didn't flatter each other. Instead, they talked about their gains in the battle for Providence and verified each other's strength. Chu Mu was the strongest. They were completely convinced. Most of the time, the 9 sword heroes asked Chu Mu for guidance. Chu Mu didn't hesitate to teach them. Time passed slowly. Suddenly, a figure walked into the great koan garden. After scanning the area, he quickly walked towards the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Chu Mu was the first to sense it. When he turned around, he was stunned. When the 9 sword heroes saw Chu Mu's expression, they quickly turned around. Their expressions changed drastically. They all stood up and blocked this person. Lai Kongyang, why have you come here? Fu Yunxiao shouted in a deep voice. I am looking for Chu Mu. It has nothing to do with you. Lai Kongyang glanced at the 9 sword heroes indifferently and said, as if he didn't care about them. His attitude made the 9 sword heroes' expressions change. They almost exploded. Brother Lai, why are you looking for me? Chu Mu walked over and stopped the 9 sword heroes in time. They weren't a match for Lai Kongyang. They couldn't even take one move. Don't worry. I am not here to find trouble with you. Lai Kongyang looked at Chu Mu and smiled faintly. I just have something to discuss with you. Please, Chu Mu gestured with his hand and said. The 9 sword heroes made way. Lai Kongyang and Chu Mu sat face to face on the chairs in the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Junior brother Chu, I was enlightened by your guidance just now. We will return to our rooms to comprehend first. Fu Yunxiao and the others were tactful and took the initiative to leave. Senior brothers, please, Chu Mu said. Until now, I still feel like I am in a dream. Lai Kongyang glanced at Chu Mu and looked at the lotus leaves in the lake. His tone became calm. Soon, you will probably break through to the Qi High realm, right? Chu Mu smiled and said. Soon, I will go into seclusion. Within 3 years, I will definitely appear in the central main sword region. Lai Kongyang retracted his gaze and looked at Chu Mu with a sharp gaze. I hope that in 3 years we will meet again in the central main sword region. We will. Chu Mu's expression was normal. He wasn't affected at all and smiled faintly. How much do you know about the central main sword region? Lai Kongyang retracted his sharp gaze and relaxed. He leaned back on the chair with a casual smile on his face and said slowly. I heard that you have been to the central main sword region. Can you tell me more about it? Chu Mu didn't answer and asked instead. 3 years ago. At that time, I hadn't comprehended the sword intent yet. Lai Kongyang said casually, but at that time I was not weak either. The title of King of Sword Heroes of the Eastern Sword Region had already fallen on my head. Chu Mu listened quietly and didn't say a word. He knew that Lai Kongyang was about to start a conversation. At that time, I thought that there were no suitable opponents in the Eastern Sword Region, so I crossed the Tongming River and entered the central main sword region. Lai Kongyang's casual tone became casual. His gaze also became a bit absent-minded as if he was immersed in his memories. Did you know? The density of the spirit qi in the central main sword region is 10 times that of our eastern sword region. 10 times. Chu Mu was shocked. The word 10 times made him think of many things. 10 times the amount of spiritual energy. How rich would that be? Just think about it. Living under 10 times the amount of spiritual energy from birth and being constantly nourished, one's body would definitely be purer and one's cultivation speed would definitely be faster. It would be many times better than a place like the Eastern Sword Domain. Being under 10 times the spirit qi was passed down from generation to generation. With excellent genes and the influence of the environment, there was never a lack of geniuses. One after another, they appeared like bamboo shoots after the rain. No wonder it was said that the central main sword region was the most prosperous gathering place of swordsmen in the ancient sword continent. 10 times the spirit qi. When I found out about this, I was very excited. How many strong swordsmen could be born from this? The moment I crossed the Tongming River, my blood boiled. Lai Kong Yang's expression flashed with excitement. From the moment I entered the central main sword region, I used the sword in my hand to challenge all the strong swordsmen in the Sea of Qi realm. I didn't let any of them go. They were all defeated by my sword. Chumu nodded. Even though Lai Kong Yang was defeated by him in the end, it wasn't because he wasn't strong enough. In fact, he was very strong. Even if the Eastern Sword region couldn't be compared to the Central Main Sword region, it was impossible for the King of Sword heroes of the Eastern Sword region to not even make a splash when they entered the Central Main Sword region. I challenged all the way and never lost a single time. I had the thought that the swordsmen of the Central Main Sword region were just SOSO. Thus, I set up an arena outside of the Tong Tian Sword Tower and said that I only wanted to lose once. Speaking up to here, a bitter smile flashed across Lai Kong Yang's face. There was even a trace of unwillingness in his eyes. What I didn't expect was that after I said those words, someone immediately came to fight with me. And the result? Chumu was a bit curious. Looking at Lai Kong Yang's expression, he seemed to have lost. What Chumu was curious about was how he lost. One sword. Lai Kong Yang's tone was bitter. Just one sword and I was defeated. One sword. Chumu was shocked. His expression changed and a storm was brewing in his heart. Even if it was Lai Kong Yang who hadn't comprehended the sword will 3 years ago, he was still not weak. But he was defeated by one sword. My opponent was the same as me. He was also at the peak of the Qi High realm. He was only 27 years old, but he had already comprehended the sword will. That was why he defeated me with one sword. Lai Kong Yang said self-deprecatingly. I only found out later that his name was Gu Xinghun. He became a sword hero at the age of 21 and was known as the Vast Sea Sword Hero. He comprehended the sword will at the age of 25 and was ranked 27 on the Central Main Sword region's Heavenly Sword Hero list. Chumu sucked in a breath of cold air. He became a sword hero at the age of 21 and comprehended the sword will at the age of 25. With such strength, he was only ranked 27 on the Heavenly Sword Hero list. Then, what about those who were ranked before him? I'm not telling you this to prove anything to you. I just want to tell you that one day, when you go to the Central Main Sword region, you must remember not to repeat my mistake. Lai Kong Yang's expression returned to normal. He smiled. Your talent is above mine. I really hope that you can be like this time and trample all the geniuses of the Central Main Sword region under your feet. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 475. Chumu had never been a complacent person. At every moment, he was aware of his inadequacies, reflecting on himself, perfecting himself, striving for perfection, striving for transcendence, and becoming even more powerful. After chatting with Lai Kong Yang for a while, and learning about the Central Main Sword realm from him, Chumu felt an even greater yearning towards the Central Main Sword realm. He couldn't wait to go there. However, he also knew that he could go there, but he had to make some preparations. At the very least, he had to hand over all the things he needed to do. Only then would he be able to go there without any worries. Elder Long, who was in charge of the battle for karmic luck, summoned Chumu. They conversed in an extremely friendly manner, which confused Chumu. However, Elder Long did not explain why. In short, it was enough for Chumu to know that Elder Long did not harbor any ill intentions towards him. The next day, the people of the 10 Sword Manors all left East Saint City on their respective flying monsters. The decennial battle for karmic luck had also come to an end. The bustling East Saint City was filled with people, and it would probably take some time for peace to return. No matter what, the news of the new sword hero, Chumu, immediately spread out from East Saint City, sweeping through the entire eastern sword domain like a storm. Time flew by, and a month passed in the blink of an eye. However, the discussion about this year's battle for karmic luck did not slow down at all. It was all because this year's battle for karmic luck was just too unexpected, and a super dark horse like Chu Mu had appeared. Apart from Chu Mu, Lai Kongyang, Lu Yuan, and Ao Xingyun had all comprehended sword intent. Coupled with Chu Mu, there were a total of 4 sword heroes who had comprehended sword intent. This was a grand event that had never happened before. In the past, there had only been 2 sword heroes who had comprehended sword intent at most. Senior brother, we came a month late. Otherwise, we would have been able to see the decennial karmic luck battle of the 10 great sword mansions of the Eastern Sword region. In a restaurant in East Saint City, there were 3 people sitting at a table near the window, 2 men and 1 woman. One of the men looked to be in his 30s, the other looked to be under 30, and the woman looked to be in her early 20s. The one who spoke was the female swordsman. It's just a battle for karmic luck between the 10 great sword manors of the Eastern Sword domain. What's there to watch? The young swordsman's expression was indifferent, and there was a trace of pride between his eyebrows. As for the swordsman in his 30s, he was dressed like a servant or a guard. But senior brother, there are 4 swordsmen who have comprehended sword intent in this battle for Providence. The swordswoman's bright eyes were filled with agility. The cultivation environment of the Eastern Sword domain is much worse than that of the Central Sword domain. The number of geniuses here is also incomparable to that of the Central Sword domain. To be able to comprehend sword intent is already quite extraordinary. Oh, tell me about the 4 swordsmen who have comprehended sword intent. The young man seemed to be a little interested. Senior brother, you have to listen carefully. This is the information that I've collected with all my heart. The swordswoman smiled and said in a coquettish tone. Then, she started talking. 30% sword intent. 50% sword intent. 30 years old. The young man's eyes flashed with slight disdain. 10% sword intent, that's interesting. However, it's not enough for me to take action. But this 23-year-old who has comprehended 12% sword intent has piqued my interest. The man in his 30s didn't say anything, but his heart was filled with astonishment. He had become a sword hero at the age of 20, comprehended 12% sword intent at the age of 23, and became the king of sword heroes of the Eastern Sword domain. Such a talent in the Central Sword domain would be able to dominate an area and attract the attention of countless sections. He might even be able to join a powerful sword sect and receive special training. He looked at the young man beside him and saw a flash of interest in his eyes. He knew that his young master was tempted. His young master's talent was exceptional, and his family background was extraordinary. He had also become a sword hero at the age of 20. Now that he was 27, his sword intent had already surpassed 10%, and he was ranked 10th on the Heavenly Sword Hero roll. He was also an outer sect disciple of the Divine Firmament Sword sect, and had already caught the eye of an elder. Once he became an inner sect disciple, he would become the disciple of that elder, and his status would rise. The young master was proud and arrogant, and he himself was powerful. He loved to target those new geniuses. Of course, the geniuses that he targeted had to have the ability to do so. Spread the news. In 2 months, I will set up a battle arena in front of the Tongming River. All the sword heroes of the Eastern Sword domain can participate, the young swordsman said calmly. The swordswoman's eyes lit up and she clapped her hands. Senior brother's goal is to force that Chu Mu to take action? That's right. He's just a mere Chu Mu. What right does he have for me to take the initiative to find him? The young man laughed coldly. The purple-crowned crane soared in the sky, its wings flapping as it sped away at high speed. After a month, everyone had calmed down. In this month, other than resting, Chu Mu used his time as usual. He used half of his time to comprehend sword intent, and the other half to comprehend sword technique. His tearing concept and cloud concept had already reached perfection. Even if he continued to comprehend them, he would not be able to improve them at all. He could only work on the application. As for the application, he could directly comprehend sword techniques and so on. There was no need to specially allocate time. Although Chu Mu had also comprehended the other 6 concepts and had reached 40% mastery, these concepts were of no help to the current Chu Mu. Moreover, it was too difficult to comprehend these 6 concepts, and it would take too much time. In addition, now that he had sword intent and the incomplete sword techniques he had created based on sword intent, Chu Mu had no need to waste time on those 6 concepts. He would neglect the essentials and focus on the trifles. The application of the Battle of Karmic Luck and a month of meditation had made the application of Moon Slayer more flexible than before, and its power had also increased slightly. It could be said that Moon Slayer was Chu Mu's most practical and most powerful move at the moment. As for Iron Slash and Point Kill, they were not weak in terms of power, but they could not be compared to Moon Slayer. However, compared to the Stonequake sword or Sky-splitting sword strike under the perfection of tearing concept, Iron Slash and Point Kill were obviously 3 or 4 times more powerful than Lu Yuan's Ten Blade. Ten Blades was the embryonic form of a sword technique based on sword intent, while Iron Slash and Point Kill were 2 ultimate sword techniques that used sword momentum to the extreme. Because Iron Slash and Point Kill had a very deep foundation and were extremely powerful, it was very difficult to integrate sword intent into them. It was 5 times more difficult than Moon Slayer. Chu Mu had too little time to do it at the moment. If the huge power of destiny could support him for another month, Chu Mu was sure that he could do it. Unfortunately, without the support of the huge power of destiny, even though his own power of destiny had increased slightly, his comprehension speed was still not fast enough. It was far from being comparable to during the Battle of Karmic Luck. If I can successfully replace sword intent and integrate sword momentum into Iron Slash and Point Kill, the power of Iron Slash and Point Kill will definitely be 3 or 4 times stronger than Moon Slayer, Chu Mu said secretly. Iron Slash and Point Kill were the ultimate sword techniques of a swordsman, and they were obviously different from the sword techniques of a swordsman. The sword techniques of a swordsman appeared on the outside, while those of a swordsman appeared on the inside. They compressed and condensed all kinds of power to the limit in the sword body, thus displaying terrifying power. The price was that they could not attack from a distance and could only be used in close combat. Even so, these 2 ultimate sword techniques were still very useful. For example, Lai Kongyang had been defeated by Point Kill in the end. Although Chu Mu had shown mercy, he knew that even if he had used all his strength, he would not have been able to severely injure Lai Kongyang, let alone kill him. In terms of power, Point Kill was far from being comparable to Lai Kongyang's Lai Huang break. However, if even Point Kill could not do anything to Lai Kongyang, then Chu Mu would have to wait for Lai Kongyang's secret technique to lose its effect to defeat him. However, Lai Kongyang would be the weakest Lai Kongyang at that time. Even if he won, Chu Mu would not be happy. Iron Slash was an ultimate sword technique that combined sword chi, ripping concept, sword momentum, and stone-shaking force into one. It had a terrifying cutting and tearing power that could cut through anything. Point Kill was an ultimate sword technique that combined sword chi, ripping concept, sword momentum, and stone-shaking force into one. It had the characteristic of penetrating force, and could penetrate through anything to attack the target behind it. The stone-shaking force could only penetrate a layer of something less than 1 meter thick, regardless of whether it was physical or energy. Lai Kongyang's sky-burning green flame was extremely terrifying, and there was no other way. Chu Mu could only choose Point Kill. The tip of the sword had to come into contact with the object that he wanted to penetrate before activating Point Kill. Only then would the power of the sword be able to penetrate through the sky-burning green flame and hit Lai Kongyang's chest. Lai Kongyang was wearing an extreme-grade armor, and his defense was extremely strong. It blocked the power of point kill after penetrating the sky-burning green flame. However, that power still had the characteristic of penetrating, and it was also very powerful. Therefore, a trace of power was able to penetrate the armor and enter Lai Kongyang's body, directly piercing his heart and causing a light injury, causing him to lose. Sword intent, moon slash, iron slash, and point kill. These four were the main points that Chu Mu was currently comprehending. It had been a month since he left the East Saint City, and his sword intent was still at 12%. Chu Mu also knew that without the support of such a huge amount of luck, it would not be easy for his sword intent to break through to 13%. Chu Mu also knew that compared to the other sword heroes in the East Sword region, he had already surpassed them by a lot. He was way ahead of them, and even Lai Kongyang could not be compared to him. However, Chu Mu felt that his real battlefield was in the Central Sword region. That place was a world filled with geniuses and powerful swordsmen. Only a place like that would be his home. Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye, another 2 months had passed. Chu Mu's sword intent had broken through as he wished, reaching 13%. Its power was even stronger, and his moon slash and other sword skills were also slightly perfected. 3 more months, and I will arrive at the Great Kuan Sword Palace. Late at night, when it was time to rest, Chu Mu was lying on a tree trunk, looking at the starry sky and thinking, after returning to the Sword Palace, I will meet with my elder brother and the others. I will then return to my family and stay for a few days. After that, I will leave the East Sword region and head to the Central Sword region. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 476. When Chu Mu and the others returned to the Great Kuan Sword Mansion, they realized that the entire mansion had changed. The atmosphere was joyous, as if it was the new year. The joy and excitement of the students and elders could be felt everywhere. Half a year ago, after Bailey Jianghe reported the outcome of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion's battle for Providence, the mansion master decided to spread the good news throughout the entire mansion. Regardless of whether it was the king's mansion, the inner mansion, or the outer mansion, everyone knew about it. When they understood the significance of the battle for Providence to the entire Sword Mansion, the shock in their hearts could not be any greater. The name Chu Mu once again stirred up a storm in the Sword Mansion. In the end, it was like a brand that was engraved in everyone's heart. They would never forget it until death. The king of sword heroes came from the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. What kind of glory was that? At the same time, it was an extremely strong motivation for the students of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion. After half a year, many students had broken through their bottlenecks and their cultivation had increased. In half a year, the overall strength of the Great Kuan Sword Mansion students had increased by a small level. This was unimaginable in the past. It could be said with certainty that the Great Kuan Sword Mansion was on par with the 4 major sword sects in the past. But now, the Great Kuan Sword Mansion had once again surpassed the 4 major sword sects. In the future, it would definitely be able to surpass the 4 major sword sects like 60 years ago. The decennial battle for Providence was extremely important. The 4 major sword sects also knew of the outcome. They also knew that Chu Mu was now the new king of sword heroes in the Eastern Sword domain. He was a one-of-a-kind genius. Each of the sword sects had set a rule that they could not provoke Chu Mu. The current Chu Mu could be considered to have matured. Unless they sent a primary realm swordsman to kill him, they might not be able to kill Chu Mu even if they sacrificed their future as a 9th transformation realm swordsman. If they failed to kill Chu Mu, they would have a huge grudge. When Chu Mu truly matured and came for revenge, it would bring great trouble. As for sending astral realm swordsmen to kill Chu Mu, it would be easily discovered. by then, it would incur the wrath of the great Kuan sword mansion. Although the strength of each of the 4 major sword sects was about the same as the great Kuan sword mansion, the great Kuan sword mansion had once been glorious. They had once stood above the 4 major sword sects for hundreds and thousands of years. Their foundation was much more robust than the 4 major sword sects. They also relied on the great Kuan royal family. A student like Chu Mu would definitely be valued by the sword mansion, even more so than the 3 sons of swords. Once they made a move on Chu Mu, it would only infuriate the sword mansion. At that time, the sword mansion would mobilize all their forces. Coupled with the great Kuan royal family, even if the 4 great sword sects joined forces, it would only end in a lose-lose situation. As for the Moro sword sect, which had assigned Chu Mu as a core disciple, they also revoked the mission and issued a statement, listing Chu Mu as someone not to be provoked. They also made other decisions. Chu Mu, congratulations. You have become the Sword Mansion's 4th son of swords, Bailey Jiang, he said to Chu Mu. Son of swords. Chu Mu was immediately stunned. Wasn't this something that could only be obtained after one's cultivation reached the astral realm? That's right. Because of you, our great Kuan sword mansion was able to reverse the 60 years of being at the bottom and obtain the 3rd place. From now on, our great Kuan sword mansion's luck will rise, and our overall strength will gradually increase. Although we might not be able to improve in the next war of luck, at the very least, we have hope of maintaining our current ranking. As long as we have more time, our sword mansion will regain its former glory. Bailey Jiang, he said excitedly, you have contributed greatly to the sword mansion. Now, you have defeated Lai Kongyang and become the new sword hero monarch of the Eastern Sword domain. Be it in terms of talent or prestige, it is only a matter of time before you become the Son of Swords. Chu Mu nodded and did not decline. It was as Bailey Jiang, he said, it was only a matter of time. Furthermore, the mansion master wants to see you. Bailey Jiang, he said with a smile. Bailey Jiang, he smiled and said with a little envy, the chief mansion master has not appeared for many years. No one has seen him for decades. The chief mansion master of the great Kuan sword mansion was called Li Daoyuan. He was not the sword of Gojoseon, but he possessed the strength of a sword of Gojoseon. However, when he possessed the strength of a sword of Gojoseon, he had already surpassed the limit of obtaining the title of Sword of Gojoseon. However, this did not affect his strength. The chief mansion master only met with Chu Mu alone. Aside from the 2 of them, no one else knew what they were talking about. Of course, they did not talk about anything important. It was just a chat between a powerful senior and an outstanding junior. They also expressed their gratitude to Chu Mu. After that, the chief mansion master gave Chu Mu a strand of sword essence, which merged into Chu Mu's spiritual world. This strand of sword essence is the meteor sword essence that I refined. When you encounter a fatal danger, you can use your mind to activate it. It will not consume any of your energy and can severely injure the Sword of Gojoseon or block the Sword of Gojoseon's attacks until its energy is exhausted, the chief mansion master said. Chu Mu was greatly shocked. To think that a strand of meteor sword essence could possess such might. If used properly, it could even kill a Sword of Gojoseon, even though the probability of that happening was extremely low. This gift, an incomparably huge gift, made Chu Mu's heart beat wildly. His blood rushed through his body like a flood. With this strand of meteor sword essence, it meant that Chu Mu had an additional chance of survival when facing a Sword of Gojoseon. However, a Sword of Gojoseon was not a cabbage that could be found anywhere. Furthermore, which Sword of Gojoseon was not a high and mighty existence. Why would they lower their status and attack a nobody like Chu Mu? However, just because the Sword of Gojoseon did not attack, it did not mean that the powerful swordsman below the Sword of Gojoseon would not attack. This strand of meteor sword essence was extremely useful. Moreover, this strand of meteor sword essence was not a one-time use item. It could be used multiple times depending on the amount of energy consumed. Even if Chu Mu's cultivation had broken through to the origin realm, this strand of meteor sword essence would still be of great help. With this strand of sword essence, Chu Mu could do many things that he could not do before. With your talent, you must go to the central main sword region. That is the most suitable place for you. The chief said, I am not giving you this strand of meteor sword essence as a reward. I want to ask you for a favor. This matter may be very safe, but it may also be very dangerous. You can choose not to promise me. Chief, please tell me. Chu Mu said. He was a little speechless. The chief had sent the meteor sword essence over without asking for his permission. Now, he was saying such things. What a hypocrite. Actually, I am not from the great Kuan dynasty. I am from the Li clan in the Pingyang county of the central main sword region. The chief said slowly. His eyes were filled with reminiscence. The Li clan is the largest clan in the Pingyang county of the Xiqing prefecture. It has a history of more than 1,000 years and has a deep foundation. More than 100 years ago, when I became the clan leader, I wanted to lead the clan to become an aristocratic family of the ancient sword dynasty. At that time, I was high-spirited and worked hard. In just 10 years, the Li clan grew rapidly under my leadership. However, because of this, I offended many people. However, as the Li clan grew stronger, these enemies were no longer in my eyes. Chu Mu listened quietly. Once, in an auction, I took a fancy to a treasure that was useful to the clan. I bid for it without caring about anything else. Because of this, I offended an inner sect disciple of the Divine Firmament Sword sect. That inner sect disciple attacked me after the auction. Although he was strong, he was not my match. In the end, he died under my sword. However, that inner sect disciple turned out to be the grandson of an inner sect elder of the Divine Firmament Sword sect. In anger, the inner sect elder of the Divine Firmament Sword sect personally attacked. I was not his match and escaped under the cover of my personal guards. I was saved by the previous chief of the Great Kuan Sword sect. The previous chief negotiated with the Divine Firmament Sword sect through the Eastern Sage Palace. In the end, I survived a sword strike from that elder and swore to never enter the central main sword region. As Li Daoyuan spoke, there was no deep hatred in his tone. Instead, there was a kind of great enlightenment. What happened back then, regardless of whether it was right or wrong, is already in the past. I also have no intention of taking revenge. It can be said that the disaster of the Li clan was caused by me. Li Daoyuan said sadly, I feel that I have let down the Li clan. Therefore, this time, I beg of you. After entering the central main sword region, if you have the chance, please make a trip to Pingyang County and see if the Li clan still exists. If the Li clan is in danger, according to your own ability, help as much as you can. If it is indeed something you cannot do, then do your best to preserve the bloodline of the Li clan. Chu Mu could hear the guilt in Li Daoyuan's tone. Chief, don't worry. I will go, Chu Mu said. In that case, I will have to trouble you. Li Daoyuan said and waved his hand. Go. Later, the Sword Manor will give you the reward for you. In addition, the Moro Sword sect will also compensate you. After Chu Mu left, Bailey Jiang summoned Chu Mu and gave him 2 high-grade spatial bracelets. One of them was a reward for Chu Mu from the Sword Manor. The reason was that Chu Mu had made great contributions in the battle for luck. Even the 9 sword heroes received rewards, although they could not compare to Chu Mu's. The other high-grade spatial bracelet was a gift from the Moro Sword sect. It was called compensation, and they hoped that Chu Mu would not hold a grudge over the past conflicts. After Chu Mu returned to the sword tower and checked the items in the 2 high-grade spatial bracelets, he immediately beamed with joy. Rich, very rich, exceeding Chu Mu's expectations. This was especially so for the Great Kuan Sword Manor's reward. It was several times more generous than the compensation given by the Moro Sword sect. After a careful inspection, Chu Mu calmed down. There were naturally many spiritual stones and elixirs. There were also some rare metal ores, spiritual herbs, and so on. These were all things that swordsmen needed. Unfortunately, for Chu Mu, who cultivated the heavenly baron's sword chi technique, they were not that useful. In fact, for Chu Mu, the biggest gain after returning to the sword manor this time was the meteor sword energy from Li Daoyuan. As for the matter that Li Daoyuan asked him to do, it should not be too difficult. I will keep a part of it for myself. I can bring the rest back to the Chu clan and strengthen it. Chu Mu thought to himself. After making up his mind, he went to the inner mansion to gather Chu Tian and the others. Then, he went to the outer mansion to gather the disciples of the Green Edge Sword sect and so on. After that, he left the Sword Manor and returned to the Chu clan. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 477. The Wind-Winged Dragon was extremely fast, and Chu Mu did not spend much time to return to the Chu clan. After staying in the Chu clan for 10 days, Chu Mu spent a lot of time with his parents. He also used pills to increase his parents' cultivation and gave a lot of spiritual stones and pills to his grandfather, Chu Dongxiong, to develop the Chu clan. It could be said that the Chu clan's development speed was extremely fast. The number of experts was constantly increasing, and their businesses were also expanding. They were already 10 times stronger than the Chu clan before. The royal family of the Great Kuan clan had even decreed that the area of 1,000 miles around Kaiyang City would be the Chu clan's territory. The Chu clan would be protected by the royal family of the Great Kuan clan, and would be guarded by an army of 1,000 soldiers. The leader of this army was an Origin Realm swordsman, and the members of the army were all at the Qi High Realm. They were extremely powerful. Adding on the large amount of spiritual stones and pills that Chu Mu brought back, it was a great opportunity for the Chu clan's rapid development. After listening to Li Daoyuan's words, Chu Mu understood that he was worried about the Chu clan. Naturally, he hoped that the Chu clan would become stronger. But at the same time, the Chu clan could not afford to provoke powerful enemies. Otherwise, not only would they not be able to become stronger, they would also be destroyed. Fortunately, the Eastern Sword Domain was different from the Central Sword Domain. Although the Central Sword Domain had the Ancient Sword Dynasty, it seemed to be dominated by sword sects, while the Eastern Sword Domain was dominated by the 10 dynasties. Now that the Chu clan had the protection of the royal family of the Great Kuan clan and a powerful army, they had enough stability and were suitable for rapid development. Even so, Chu Mu did not dare to reveal the large amount of spiritual stones and pills that he brought back. He only revealed a small portion, which was enough to surprise the Chu clan. Most of it was kept by Chu Dongxiong. It was worth mentioning that Chu Dongxiong's cultivation had already reached the peak of the Qi transformation realm, and he had also comprehended the concept of wind. The Chu clan's development could be considered to be on the right path. As long as he did not die, no one in the Great Kuan dynasty would dare to touch the Chu clan. It could be said that Chu Mu was now the protector of the Chu clan. With nothing left to worry about, Chu Mu left. However, he gave the beast seal pearl with the wind-winged demonic dragon in it to his father, Chu Xingyun. To Chu Mu, the use of the wind-winged dragon as a means of transportation was no longer that obvious. Since that was the case, he might as well keep it. It was a mid-level transcendent beast after all. Not only was it fast, but it was also very powerful. It was enough to be the guardian beast of the Chu clan for now. Executing the secret art of traversing the heavens, Chu Mu sped away from Mizar City, heading towards the Eastern Sage City. His purpose was to enter the Eastern Sage Hall for a month of contemplation. After that, they headed to the port of Tongming River. There was more than one way to reach the Central Main Sword Domain from the Eastern Main Sword Domain, but the most common and safest way was to set off from the port of the Bright Connection River and take a large ship to cross the Bright Connection River into the Central Main Sword Domain. Even Origin Realm swordsmen, unless they were extremely confident, wouldn't choose to use their own abilities to fly across the Bright Connection River because it was very wide. Time flowed by and 3 months had passed. Chu Mu once again left the territory of the Great Kuan dynasty. He used the secret art of traversing the heavens to hasten his journey. When he was tired, he would stop to recover his sword chi, cultivate for a while, and then continue his journey. Chu Mu's strength had also improved under such high intensity. In the blink of an eye, another 3 months had passed. Chu Mu finally arrived at the Eastern Sage City. Upon arriving at the Eastern Sage Hall, Chu Mu immediately requested to use that one chance. After obtaining permission, he began a month of seclusion. 1 month later, Chu Mu ended his seclusion and left the Eastern Sage Hall, heading towards the Bright Connection City. The Bright Connection City was a port city built along the Bright Connection River. It was a city jointly funded and managed by the 10 great dynasties. Because it was a port city, and also the first stop from the central main sword domain to the eastern main sword domain, there was a lot of trade and a developed economy. The port city of Bright Connection City was the best place for those big merchants to gather. There were also many rare treasures from the central main sword domain. At the same time, there were many powerful sword cultivators within the Bright Connection City. They were sufficient to guard the city and deter those with bad intentions from acting rashly. Chu Mu walked into the Bright Connection City covered in dust. He wasn't in a hurry to rush to the port. The prosperity of the Bright Connection City surpassed that of the Eastern Sage City. After all, one was the place where the Eastern Sage Hall was located, and there were countless experts there. The other was mainly focused on economic development. Naturally, the feeling would be different as well. Ao Xingyun has been defeated. Even Lu Yuan has been defeated. Now, only Lai Kongyang and Chu Mu haven't made a move yet. Ao Xingyun's defeat doesn't count for much. But Lu Yuan has already been in seclusion for a month. His sword intent has increased from 5 points to 7 points. His strength has also increased. Yet, he still wasn't a match for a single sword strike from his opponent. Yeah, this person is too terrifying. Could this be the strength of a sword hero from the central main sword domain? He's actually so strong. I'm afraid that even Lai Kongyang might not be a match for him. Even Chu Mu might not be a match for him. Bullshit, if Lai Kongyang and Chu Mu were to make a move, they would definitely be able to defeat him. Chu Mu had just walked into a restaurant. He hadn't even sat down when he heard the heated discussion. Moreover, his name was constantly being mentioned, which aroused a trace of curiosity in him. Although I also hope so, in these past few months, I've watched every single sword hero's battle with that person. Really, although that person is extremely arrogant and loathsome, his strength is really strong. Every time, he only uses a single sword strike. Moreover, he didn't use any sword techniques. Even when he defeated Lu Yuan, he didn't use any sword technique. His tone was heavy. Instantly, the heated discussion died down. Everyone in the restaurant fell into a momentary silence. No matter how strong he is, I believe that as long as Lai Kongyang or Chu Mu were to make a move, one of them would definitely be able to defeat him. You have to know that in the past year, whether it's Lai Kongyang or Chu Mu, both of them must have improved tremendously. Everyone, I've just arrived at Bright Connection City. I'm very curious about what you're talking about. Can you tell me more about it in detail? Suddenly, a middle-aged man who looked like a merchant asked in a clear voice. When Chu Mu saw that someone was asking, he dismissed the idea of speaking and listened carefully. It's like this. About 9 months ago, a sword hero who claimed to be from the central main sword domain set up a sword battle arena at the port of Bright Connection River. He declared that he would challenge the sword heroes from the eastern main sword domain. As long as the sword heroes thought they were strong enough, they could accept the challenge. If they won, they would be able to obtain 10,000 upper-level spiritual stones. If they lost, they wouldn't have to pay anything. Immediately, someone explained, 10,000 upper-level spiritual stones. Chumu was slightly surprised. To most of the sword heroes from the Eastern Main Sword domain, 10,000 upper-level spiritual stones was not a small amount. It was enough to tempt them. After the news spread, sword heroes came one after another and fought with the sword hero. In the end, no one was his match. With one sword, without using any sword techniques, all the sword heroes were defeated. A month ago, Ao Xingyun came to make a move, but he was also not a match for the sword hero. Yesterday, Lu Yuan came here and fought with the sword hero. In the end, he was still defeated with one sword. The sword hero even said that there was no one in the Eastern Main Sword domain who could defeat him. The speaker's face was filled with anger. Arrogant, too arrogant. The middle-aged merchant slammed the table angrily. If I had the strength, I would definitely let him know how powerful I am. As a member of the Eastern Main Sword domain, under such a situation where the Eastern Main Sword domain was being humiliated, it was natural for him to have a common hatred for the enemy. Even Lu Yuan has been defeated. Now we can only place our hopes on Lai Kongyang and Chu Mu. After the Wild Wave Sword hero defeated Lu Yuan, he said that if no one could fight him within 3 months, it would prove that no one in the Eastern Sword domain could match him. It would prove that the sword heroes of the Eastern Sword domain are a bunch of trash that can't be brought to the stage. His tone was filled with indignation. Now we can only hope that Lai Kongyang or Chu Mu can hear the news and come here to fight with the sword hero to defend the honor of the Eastern Main Sword domain. I think we can only rely on Chu Mu. I heard that Lai Kongyang went into seclusion after the Battle of Luck. He wants to break through the Qi High realm, pass the 9 transformation realm, and reach the UNG realm. Oh, Lai Kongyang has already taken this step. Chu Mu was startled at first, but his expression quickly returned to normal. Violent Wave Sword Hero. For some reason, after hearing the discussions of the people in the restaurant, Chu Mu had a feeling that this Violent Wave Sword Hero seemed to have come for him. However, for some reason, he did not name Lin Fan and challenge him personally. Instead, he used such an extreme method to provoke all the sword heroes of the Eastern Main Sword domain. It had to be said that this was a good method. At least, with his strength, he was qualified to use such a method. Since that is the case, I will come and meet this sword hero tomorrow. Chu Mu thought to himself. After listening for a while, he drank a pot of wine and ate some delicious processed demonic beast meat. Then, he booked a room in the restaurant. The rooms in the restaurant were decorated beautifully and grandly. It was pleasing to the eye. If one felt comfortable, they would naturally feel comfortable staying there. That night, Chu Mu did not cultivate. Instead, he rested peacefully. Tomorrow, he would take the big boat across the Tongming River and head to the Central Main Sword domain. He was slightly excited. The Central Main Sword domain was a gathering place for powerful swordsmen. It was a holy land that many swordsmen yearned for. Basically, no matter if it was the East, South, West, North Main Sword domain, or overseas, once one's cultivation reached a certain level and wanted to train, they would all head to the Central Main Sword domain. As for the swordsmen of the Central Main Sword domain who wanted to go out and train, they would usually do so within the Central Main Sword domain. This was because the Central Main Sword domain was vast. It was several times larger than the total area of the East, South, West and North Main Sword domain. There were even some forbidden areas that humans had never explored before. However, before I head to the Central Main Sword domain, let me do one more thing for the Eastern Main Sword domain, Chu Mu thought to himself. Lying on the bed, the moonlight shone in through the window and fell on his body. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 478. Chu Mu was 24 years old this year. His soul had been in this world for 8 years. It was like a dream. The Tongming River harbor was bustling with people coming and going. In front of the harbor, a large crowd had gathered, forming layers of encirclement. Within the encirclement was a huge empty space with a makeshift battle arena. I'm very disappointed. Until now, I've fought with more than 100 sword heroes from the Eastern Sword domain. Not only is there no one who can fight with me, they don't even have the right to make me use my sword. A young swordsman stood in the middle of the battle arena. He stood tall against the wind, his body as straight as a sword pointing to the sky. He had a cold and arrogant look on his face. When he opened his eyes, they flashed like cold lightning. Traces of contempt appeared on his face, and everyone present could see it clearly. In my opinion, the Eastern Sword domain is just SOSO. Even if you're the Sword Hero King, you're just a slightly stronger ant. Arrogant, too arrogant. Who do you think you are? How dare you speak such arrogant words? The young man's words and contemptuous look on the battle arena immediately angered everyone present. What? Are you angry? That's just the behavior of a weakling. If you want to refute me, then come up. Draw your sword and fight with me. If you can defeat me, then I'll take back what I said and admit that I'm arrogant. At the same time, I'll take out 100,000 high-grade spirit stones to the person who defeats me. The Wild Wave Sword Hero seemed to want to further enrage the crowd as he sneered. 100,000 high-grade spirit stones. The crowd was shocked, but no one dared to go up. Although they were furious, they knew very well that they were no match for this arrogant person. Just look at the outcome of the 100 or so sword heroes. They were all defeated with a single sword. Even the famous Lu Yuan could not avoid it. Not far away, the female swordsman and the middle-aged swordsman were also shocked. 100,000 upper-rank spiritual stones was a lot. To the Raging Wave Sword Hero, this was not a small sum of spiritual stones. If he really took it out, it would be enough to make him feel the pinch for a long time. However, he was confident that none of the Eastern Sword domain's sword heroes were his match. That was why he dared to utter such arrogant words. If the Sword Hero King, Chu Mu, were here, he would definitely be able to defeat you. Someone unwillingly roared. All right, I'll give you time. Go and find that Chu Mu. I want to see just how strong the Sword Hero King of the Eastern Sword domain is and whether he is qualified to make me use my second sword. The Raging Wave Swordsman was still as arrogant as ever. I will use my sword to tell him that the Sword Hero King of the Eastern Sword region is nothing in front of me. The Wild Wave Sword Hero's words once again caused the crowd to be enraged. The middle-aged sword guard was already prepared, worried that the crowd would attack out of anger, and the consequences would be dire. Suddenly, there was a whooshing sound, and a ray of white light that seemed to have come from beyond the heavens instantly passed through the crowd and landed on the battle arena, facing the Raging Wave Sword Hero from afar. Finally, there's someone who dares to come up. Don't worry, I won't let you lose too badly. The Raging Wave Sword Hero was stunned at first, but then he used a superior tone to speak to the person who had appeared in front of him. Thank you for your kind intentions, but unfortunately, I will let you lose too badly. A smile appeared on the newcomer's face as he spoke unhurriedly. You're quite confident. The Raging Wave Sword Hero's face was filled with astonishment, and then he laughed maniacally. His expression clearly showed that he thought the newcomer was just boasting. Since that's the case, I'll give you a chance. Tell me your name. At the very least, you're the first person who dares to say such words to me. Didn't you just ask me to come find you? Chu Mu's lips curled into a smile as he replied indifferently. You're Chu Mu. The Raging Wave Sword Hero's eyes shone with an extremely sharp light, as if a sword light had shot through the air and landed on Chu Mu's face. The female swordsman and the middle-aged swordsman were also stunned. Their gazes landed on Chu Mu's face, and the light in their eyes swirled as if they wanted to see through Chu Mu. Chu Mu. He's Chu Mu. The sword hero who defeated Lai Kongyang, the Zhen Tian Sword Hero King of our Eastern Sword region. He's finally here. I believe that he can definitely defeat this arrogant person." The surrounding crowd was instantly shaken, and cries of surprise rose and fell one after another. Chu Mu's name had spread throughout the entire Eastern Sword region after the Battle of Providence. After more than a year, it could be said that there was no one who did not know of him. He had become the idol of many young swordsmen, the person they admired the most, the goal they wanted to pursue, and so on. However, there were very few people who had actually seen Chu Mu. Even though there were more than 1 million people in the Eastern Saint City who had seen Chu Mu's face, compared to the entire Eastern Sword region, these million people were like a drop in the ocean. Although there were many rumors about Chu Mu's appearance and clothing, it was important to know that Chu Mu's name had shaken the entire Eastern Sword region. He had many fans, and there were many young swordsmen who imitated his clothing. The moon-white long robe had become the best-selling long robe for swordsmen, and there was no comparison. Therefore, other than those who had actually seen Chu Mu, it was not easy to recognize him from his clothing. Now, Chu Mu had admitted it himself. Who would dare to impersonate him? Perhaps there was, but they would definitely not dare to do it in public. Otherwise, if they were exposed, they would incur the wrath of the crowd. Excitement and agitation filled his heart. Chu Mu had finally made his move. The sword hero monarch of the Eastern Sword region was finally going to make his move. This was a battle that was highly anticipated. Everyone's gaze fell on Chu Mu, and their eyes were filled with anticipation and hope. This battle was not only about his personal victory or defeat, but also related to the honor of the entire Eastern Sword region. He could not afford to lose this battle. Although Chu Mu did not turn his head, he could feel the intense anticipation and hope that was almost tangible. It was like a mountain pressing down on his body. However, Chu Mu did not feel the pressure. Instead, he was calm and collected. He had never thought of himself as the savior of the world, and would not place the honor of the Eastern Sword region on his shoulders. So what if he lost? If his skills were not as good as his opponents, then he would lose. Of course, Chu Mu did not think that he would lose. From the moment he held the sword in his hand, he had walked on a path that would never admit defeat. He would cut through all obstacles and bravely move forward. His sword would only defeat one strong opponent after another, regardless of whether the opponent was reserved or arrogant. Make your move. Seeing that you are the so-called sword hero monarch of the Eastern Sword region, I will let you have 3 move. The Wild Wave Sword hero's tone was even more arrogant. After today, I will head to the Central Sword region. Facing the Wild Wave Sword hero's arrogance, Chu Mu's expression did not change. He said in a casual tone, "You will be the witness of me stepping into the Central Sword region." As soon as he finished speaking, Chu Mu made his move. His sword was fast as lightning. Even the Wild Wave Sword hero could only see a blurry sword light, not to mention the spectators. Only the middle-aged sword guard could clearly see Chu Mu drawing his sword and thrusting it out. The 2 movements were one and extremely fast. The middle-aged sword guard, who was at the Origin Realm, was shocked. It was too fast, the speed at which the sword was drawn. It was as if man and sword had become one. The Wild Wave Sword hero only saw the sword light flash in front of him, and Chu Mu's sword was already in front of him, right at his throat. The Wild Wave Sword hero could clearly feel a slight piercing pain coming from his throat. His eyes widened, and his pupils instantly contracted. The Wild Wave Sword hero drew his sword. The sword brought with it the sound of a tidal wave. The air in front of him was compressed, as if the waves of the sea were rushing out, stacking up and rushing towards Chu Mu, which slightly affected Chu Mu's speed. Just as he retreated to avoid Chu Mu's sword, the Wild Wave Sword hero suddenly realized that the sword light was once again approaching. Its target was still his throat, and the piercing pain was even more intense. His expression suddenly changed, and he had no choice but to retreat again. He used the Wild Wave step and retreated like a rushing tide. However, Chu Mu's sword light was like a maggot in the bone. It followed closely, and the Wild Wave Sword hero had no choice but to retreat again, all the way to the edge of the arena. When he stopped and looked forward, his face suddenly heated up. He realized that Chu Mu was actually standing in the same spot, and even his sword was still in the scabbard, as if he had never moved or pulled it out. Everything was like an illusion. The Wild Wave Sword hero was sure that it was not an illusion. However, he did not know how Chu Mu did it. Chu Mu's speed was fast? Indeed, his speed was fast, but it was definitely not to the point where he was confused and unable to react. In other words, there was something that he did not know and did not understand. The Wild Wave Sword hero was not the only one who did not understand. The onlookers were also confused. They only saw Chu Mu's body move, and his sword unsheathed as he charged towards the Wild Wave Sword hero. Then, the Wild Wave Sword hero kept retreating. It was like an illusion. In the blink of an eye, Chu Mu's body did not move at all. He was still standing in the same spot, and his sword was still in the scabbard. However, the Wild Wave Sword hero had already retreated to the edge of the arena. What was going on? The middle-aged sword guard rubbed his eyes. For a moment, he thought that he was hallucinating. However, he had already comprehended the profound meaning. His vision was sharper, and his knowledge was broader. He understood that Chu Mu had indeed unsheathed his sword and forced his young master to retreat. As for the fact that he did not seem to have moved at all, it was all because of his conception. Yes, this Zhen Tian sword hero, Chu Mu, had definitely grasped some special and rare mutated conception. That conception was similar to an illusion, and would cause people to hallucinate. However, it was not the conception of illusion, but a mutated conception that was even more advanced. Could it be the conception of reality and illusion? The middle-aged sword guard thought to himself. His guess was right. What Chu Mu had just displayed was indeed a rare and unique mutated conception. However, it was not the conception of reality and illusion. This conception was called the conception of reality and illusion. Reality and illusion seemed to have the same meaning. However, when it was used to name the conception, there was a difference of one level. The conception of cloud was a normal conception. The conception of illusion was a mutated conception of cloud, and its power was 10% higher than the conception of cloud. The conception of reality and illusion was also a mutated conception of cloud, one level higher than the conception of illusion, and its power was 20% higher than the conception of cloud. The conception of reality and illusion was also a mutated conception of cloud, one level higher than the conception of reality and illusion, and its power was 30% higher than the conception of cloud. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 479. The concept of illusion could be said to be the highest level of concept variation, the same as the laceration concept. The transformation of the concept of cloud into illusion was something that even Chu Mu didn't expect. It was also one of the results of his 1 month of seclusion in the East Sage Palace. The foundation of the East Sage Palace was 100 times deeper than the East Sage Palace. 1 month of seclusion was not inferior to 2 years of seclusion in the East Sage Palace. In fact, because of Chu Mu's increase in luck and other reasons, the effect was even better. Chu Mu had only been in seclusion for 3 days when his concept of cloud began to transform. It was only last night that it finally completed its transformation, and the speed was even faster than the laceration concept. At that time, Chu Mu's cultivation base was at the Qi transformation realm. Now that he was at the Qi Si realm, the speed of his soul transformation would naturally be faster. After the transformation, the 100% completion concept of cloud became 70% completion concept of illusion. Its power was also equivalent to the 100% completion concept of cloud, but it had a sense of illusion that cloud didn't have. Chu Mu didn't think that 70% completion concept of illusion was that powerful. It was still not enough for battle. Since the violent wave sword hero said that he would let Chu Mu use 3 sword moves, Chu Mu decided to test it out. Unexpectedly, the effect was quite good. Combined with his terrifying sword speed and the 3rd level of the Flying Swan illusory steps, the effect was extremely good. 3 sword moves have passed. I won't hold back anymore. Chu Mu smiled. Very good. The violent wave sword hero's face was a little gloomy. He felt that he had been toyed with by Chu Mu, and this made him extremely unhappy. Especially in Eastern Sword region, he had consecutively defeated over 100 sword heroes. No one had been able to make him use a second sword, and no one had been able to make him use a sword technique. But just now, Chu Mu's 3 sword moves made him feel a trace of threat. He couldn't help but retreat, feeling like he was a clown. With a loud bang, a violent aura soared into the sky. The sand on the sword battle arena rolled, and a whistling sound spread out in all directions. The vast and boundless aura was like the overflowing sea and the Milky Way hanging upside down. In an instant, the crowd felt as if they could see the surging waves of the sea. On the sword that the wild wave sword hero pulled out, an extremely strong water-type sword chi continuously surged. The entire sword was filled with a biting cold. It was not the coldness of ice, but the coldness of water. Wait! Just as the raging wave sword hero was about to strike, Chu Mu suddenly spoke up. What? Do you want to admit defeat? The wild wave sword hero's voice became extremely cold, his eyes filled with anger. I won't give you the chance to admit defeat. You're boasting again. Chu Mu was neither too fast nor too slow. His nonchalant expression infuriated the wild wave sword hero. What I'm saying is, it's not convenient here. Why don't we fight on the Tongming River? There was no doubt about the wild wave sword hero's strength. Otherwise, he would not have been able to defeat Lu Yuan and the others without using any sword technique. Compared to Chu Mu a year ago, his strength was probably even stronger. As soon as he finished speaking, Chu Mu's body soared into the sky. With sword chi on his back, he flapped his wings and flew hundreds of meters in the blink of an eye, flying towards the Tongming River. The wild wave sword hero also soared into the sky, using a secret flying technique to chase after him. Let's go, quickly follow him. The spectating swordsmen all moved. Those who had secret flying techniques used them, while those who did not used their movement techniques and rushed towards the Tongming River. Miss Yang, let's go as well, the swordsman said. Without any pretense, he soared into the sky. Astral Realm swordsmen already had the ability to fly, so there was no need for secret flying technique. Soon, they all arrived above the Tongming River. The Tongming River was extremely wide, and as far as the eye could see, there were only sparkling waves and flowing water. 2 figures with sword chi on their backs and wings faced each other from afar, floating hundreds of meters above the Tongming River. Countless people had gathered by the Tongming River, densely looking up. The middle-aged swordsman also stopped above the Tongming River, watching Chu Mu and the wild wave sword hero from tens of thousands of meters away. In the crowd, other than the middle-aged swordsman, there were also a few other astral realm swordsmen. However, they had all concealed their auras and did not hover in the air. They looked no different from ordinary people. I wonder if this Chu Mu can defeat him? These few astral realm swordsmen thought to themselves. They did not like the wild wave sword hero's arrogance. If it were not for the fact that they had already reached the astral realm, they would have already made a move to avoid unnecessary trouble. They had hoped so much for a powerful sword hero to appear and defeat this arrogant person. However, after waiting for a few months, no one had been able to defeat this arrogant person. Now that Chu Mu had arrived, he was the only one who had the highest chance of defeating this arrogant person. This time, will the young master still be able to defeat him? The middle-aged swordsman thought to himself. Chu Mu's 3 sword moves had shown him how extraordinary Chu Mu was, and he felt a little uneasy. Ever since the young master embarked on the path of a swordsman, everything had been smooth sailing. He had never encountered any major setbacks. As for small setbacks, they did not affect him much. If he could not defeat Chu Mu here, or even be defeated by Chu Mu, then it would not be a small setback, but a major one. One had to know that the young master looked down on the sword heroes of the Eastern sword domain from the bottom of his heart. Once he was defeated by a sword hero that he looked down on, it would be a huge blow to him. With his arrogant attitude, it would be a big problem if he could accept it. No matter how powerful the sword heroes of the Eastern sword domain are, they cannot be compared to the young master. The middle-aged swordsman dispelled that thought. The central sword domain is not something the Eastern sword domain can compare to. The difference is more than 10 times. As the number 1 genius of a family with 3,000 years of history, the most outstanding outer sect disciple of the Divine Firmament Sword Sect, and a sword hero ranked 10th on the Heavenly Sword Hero roll, even if he were to lose, he would only be defeated by those freaks from the Central Sword Domain. It is impossible for him to lose to a sword hero from the Eastern Sword Domain. I am overthinking things. As if he had been aided by the geographical advantage, the Wild Wave sword hero's aura grew even stronger. The sword pressure was unbelievably majestic, and vaguely, it seemed to resonate with the bright river below. Directly below the Wild Wave sword hero, countless ripples spread out on the bright river. Those ripples gradually became vast, forming layers of waves that pushed outwards, spreading out for thousands of meters. With the geographical advantage, the Wild Wave sword hero could unleash 120% of his abilities. Ha 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 ha, I have to say that you are very foolish. You actually suggested a battle with me on the bright river. You will regret this suggestion of yours. The Wild Wave sword hero's voice was like rolling waves, spreading out for hundreds of miles. The aura on his body grew even stronger, and the sword pressure was like a tidal wave. Rumbling sounds could be heard, and the waves below continued to grow. Under the impact, there was actually a surging sound. In that instant, the crowd seemed to see the Wild Wave sword hero and the waves of the bright river merge into one. I have overlooked it. Chu Mu was stunned at first, but then he laughed. When he had suggested a battle on the bright river, he had not thought so much. He had only felt that a battle on land would have a great impact, and he was afraid that it would affect the innocent. But so what? When one's abilities were truly strong, one would not be afraid of any external support. Even if the Wild Wave sword hero used the geographical advantage of the bright river to increase his abilities by 50%, so what? The Wild Wave sword hero's laughter stopped, and he waved the long sword in his hand. In an instant, a majestic blue sword aura pierced through the air. Like a surging wave, the waves of the bright river below also seemed to be affected, changing their direction and rushing in Chu Mu's direction. The monster-slaying sword was swung, and it shattered the blue sword aura. Show me your true abilities. This kind of small trick is not enough to deal with me, Chu Mu said at the same time as he shattered the sword aura. What's the rush? I was just warming up. The Wild Wave sword hero's expression froze, and he said coldly, Since you want to see my true abilities, I will show you the difference between a sword hero from the Central Main Sword Domain and a sword hero from the East Main Sword Domain. He slowly waved his sword, and the majestic sword pressure on his body surged like waves with a boom. The extremely thick water-type sword chi on his body was like a wave, and the bright river water below directly rose hundreds of meters high, turning into a monstrous wave that appeared behind the Wild Wave sword hero. This scene was as if it was going to drown everything. Then, the sword will soared into the sky. 18% sword will. Young Master's sword will has improved again. The middle-aged sword guard's heart trembled, and a hint of joy flashed in his eyes. This Chu Mu's sword will was at 12% a year ago. If he can improve it to 13% after a year, it will be very good. At most, it will be 14%. He is not a match for young master. Remember this sword of mine, raging waves. The wild wave sword hero's eyes were filled with blue, as if they had turned into an endless sea with raging waves. He waved his sword, and the majestic sword pressure, the thick sword chi, the mutated concept of water, the azure waves concept, and the 18% sword will. Behind him, a monstrous wave that was hundreds of meters high and thousands of meters wide was the convergence of 70% of the spiritual chi of heaven and earth. All of this combined into this sword that surpassed the limits. Raging waves. That dazzling blue wave seemed to want to swallow everything. Even the sky was about to be swallowed. Under this terrifying impact, everything was about to shatter. It was like the anger of the sea, the roar of the azure waves. It was earth-shattering. In front of the power of nature, humans were too small. Everyone who saw this scene was deeply shocked. They felt that they were invincible, as if they were ants. Young Master's sword technique is even more powerful. Chu Mu is definitely not a match for it, the middle-aged sword guard said with certainty, his eyes blazing. This was a sword at its peak. The raging waves that were hundreds of meters high and thousands of meters long rushed over, destroying everything. Chu Mu could clearly feel the terrifying pressure that wanted to crush him into powder. Moon slashing. With a low shout in his heart, Chu Mu slashed out with his sword. There was no violent and unstoppable aura. He merely swung his sword. In an instant, a 10-meter-long dark golden crescent moon broke through the sky. The world instantly darkened. Only the dark golden crescent moon could be seen tearing through the void and shooting out. With a boom, the raging waves were split in half by the dark golden crescent moon. The left and right sides were shattered by the terrifying vibrations. The blue in the wild wave sword hero's eyes reflected the dark golden color. The crescent moon slashed over, and his body felt like it was about to be torn apart. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 480. No. The wild wave sword hero screamed unconsciously. Young Master. The middle-aged sword guard's expression changed. He took a step forward, his body turning into a phantom that shuttled through the void. In an instant, he appeared in front of the wild wave sword hero. His left hand pointed out, and a violent sword energy tore through the air. Like a rainbow, it shot towards the crescent blade that was still 5 meters long. With a bang, the powerful crescent blade paused and shattered, turning into countless dark golden specks of light that sputtered in all directions. There was a loud explosion. That was the sound of a huge wave that was hundreds of meters tall crashing onto the surface of the Tongming River. Countless waves that were dozens of meters tall surged outwards. A huge ship that was passing by was instantly thrown into the air by the huge wave, causing the people on the ship to cry out in shock. Indeed, the difference between me and a primary realm swordsman is too great, Chu Mu said to himself, his expression unchanged. Even an ordinary primary realm swordsman was not someone he could contend against. The power of their sword energy was too strong, much stronger than sword chi. It was definitely not as simple as 10 times. Of course, this middle-aged primary realm swordsman was able to shatter the crescent blade with one strike of his sword energy. Otherwise, it would have been difficult to achieve. The same 18% sword will, the same unfinished sword technique, but it is actually twice as strong as young Master's raging billows, which he unleashed with the help of the geographical advantage. The middle-aged sword guard's eyes were filled with shock, and his heart was in turmoil. 24 years old. Just 24 years old, and he already has such frightening power. Even if he was placed in the central main sword region, his power would definitely be ranked in the top 8 or even top 5 of the heavenly sword ranking. Born in the eastern sword region, such a person is definitely worthy of being called a demon. If he had lived in the central main sword region since he was young, he would probably be on par with the number 1 demon on the heavenly sword ranking. The middle-aged sword guard's thoughts were faster than lightning. He temporarily forgot about the wild wave sword hero behind him. Give him a few more years and he might even become the number 1 on the central main sword domain's heavenly sword ranking. This kind of demon has a limitless future. Once he matures, he will definitely be terrifying. Thinking of this, the middle-aged sword guard suddenly thought of the raging wave sword hero and hurriedly turned around to look. His expression changed drastically, because the raging wave sword hero's face was gloomy and his eyes were filled with disappointment. It was the kind of disappointment that came from a dead heart. "Young master," the middle-aged sword guard hurriedly called out. The wild wave sword hero raised his head and glanced at him. His eyes were lifeless, and he had lost his will to fight. "No, young master has never suffered such a huge setback. This Chu Mu will become young master's inner demon. We must kill him and get rid of young master's inner demon. Otherwise, it will affect young master's cultivation in the future." The middle-aged sword guard instantly made a decision. His killing intent surged out. Ever since the young master embarked on the path of cultivation, it had been too smooth. He had never encountered any major setbacks, especially in a small place like the Eastern Sword Domain that was far from being comparable to the Central Main Sword Domain. Originally, the young master had firmly believed that none of the sword heroes in the Eastern Sword Domain were his match. Even the so-called Sword Hero King was just a slightly stronger ant. But now, he had been defeated in one strike by the ant in his heart when he was at his peak state. It was inevitable that he would lose his will to fight. Chu Mu would also become his inner demon, preventing him from improving in the future. The best way was for the young master to personally kill Chu Mu with his sword. But looking at the young master's current state, he did not have the ability to do so. As such, the middle-aged sword guard could only do it for him. Although the effect was not as good, after killing Chu Mu and bringing the young master back to the clan to rest for a period of time, he could still recover. The middle-aged sword guard was filled with killing intent. He quickly turned around, drew his sword, and slashed out. In a split second, a golden rainbow split the heavens and the earth, as if it had split the sky in half. It carried an incomparable killing intent, sharp and violent, as it charged towards Chu Mu. It was extremely fast. Just as Chu Mu sensed it, his eyes were filled with that resplendent and sharp golden rainbow. It was as if the world had disappeared and there was no way to dodge. He could only face this terrifying golden rainbow head-on. Death had arrived. Chu Mu was sure that this golden rainbow was terrifying. Even if he were to unleash all of his strength, he would not be able to block it. He would be easily defeated, killed, and turned into ashes. There was no time to think. With a single thought, the extremely terrifying meteor sword origin in his spiritual world trembled. It was about to unleash a world-destroying power to shatter the golden rainbow and kill the origin realm swordsman who dared to unleash such a strike. "Don't you dare!" A thunderous roar was heard. Following that, Chu Mu only felt a blur in front of his eyes, as if a human figure had appeared. Following that, the golden rainbow that filled the heavens and the earth disappeared. A terrifying explosion was heard, as if a plane had flown across the sky. The Tong Ming River below had caved in dozens of meters due to the terrifying energy. Countless rays of light shot out, as if they were going to pierce through the river. Only now did Chu Mu see clearly that there were two figures floating a dozen meters in front of him. There were also two figures on his left and right. They were able to float in the air without sword chi wings. This meant that they were at least in the origin stage. In other words, it was the two origin stage swordsmen who had shattered the golden rainbow to prevent him from revealing his strongest trump card, the meteor sword energy. Chu Mu had planned to keep the meteor sword energy for himself, and only use it as a last resort. Now that there were origin stage swordsmen making a move, it was naturally better. It's just a battle between sword heroes. You, an origin stage swordsman, actually dared to make a move. Could it be that the swordsman of the central main sword region can't afford to lose? One of the 4 origin stage swordsmen stared at the middle-aged swordsman and shouted coldly, "You better hide in the eastern sword region and not enter the central main sword region. Otherwise, my Qing family will not let you go." The middle-aged swordsman ignored the question of the origin stage swordsman. Instead, he looked through the origin stage swordsman and locked his gaze on Chu Mu. His tone was full of threat. He then swept his gaze across the 4 origin stage swordsmen. "As for you guys, do we need to report to you about our Qing family's actions? If you are unhappy, you can draw your sword and fight to the death with me." Arrogance was revealed at this moment. Whether it was his own strength or the Qing family behind him, they both gave him the confidence to be arrogant. Among the 4 origin stage swordsmen before him, the most powerful one was only at the initial stage of the origin stage. He, on the other hand, had the cultivation of Deshang, an origin stage swordsman. He could even have the upper hand against the 4 of them. The Qing family was a family with 3,000 years of history. They had a deep foundation and great strength. None of the sword sects in the eastern sword region could compare to them. With his own strength and powerful backing, why should he be afraid when facing 4 origin stage swordsmen who were weaker than him? Why should he back off? There was no need for that at all. The 4 origin stage swordsmen were instantly enraged. At this moment, 2 more figures flew out from the crowd and appeared beside them. The aura they emitted caused the middle-aged swordsman's expression to change drastically. Origin stage Deshang. 2 origin stage Deshang. Under such circumstances, he did not have the advantage at all. He might even be killed in a few moves. "Let's go." The middle-aged swordsman took a deep look at Chu Mu. He grabbed the Wild Wave sword hero's arm and said to the female swordsman beside him. With a "so" sound, he turned into a beam of light and sped away. Tens of thousands of meters away, the middle-aged swordsman waved his hand. A shadow rapidly enlarged and landed on the Tongming River. It turned into a long arrow-shaped boat. The 3 of them landed on the boat and drove it away at a rapid speed. Chu Mu could vaguely feel the 6 origin stage swordsmen let out a sigh of relief. They were not willing to engage in a life-and-death battle with the other party. All of this was because the eastern sword region was too weak. "Many thanks, seniors," Chu Mu said as he saluted with his sword. "No need to be so polite. You are the sword hero king of our eastern sword region. You have a bright future ahead of you. Even if we have to risk our lives, we will protect you here." The 6 origin stage swordsmen turned around. One of them, Deshang, said with a smile. The other 5 also had a sincere smile on their faces. Their words were very clear. It was only because Chu Mu was the sword hero king of the eastern sword region that he had a bright future ahead of him that they were willing to do so. If he was just an ordinary sword hero, perhaps they would step out to protect him, but they would not be so dedicated. Chu Mu did not have any dissatisfaction. This was the world of swordsmen. Strength was everything. He was not a rookie. After the Battle of Fortune, he had a better understanding. He knew where a swordsman came from, and where he came from, he would form a connection with his fortune. It was a bit like sharing honor and disgrace. To the eastern sword region, Chu Mu came from the great Kuan dynasty. However, to the ancient sword continent, Chu Mu came from the eastern sword region. Therefore, once Chu Mu continued to grow, the eastern sword region would also be slightly affected. If this continued for a long time, the situation would be different. If Chu Mu did not die prematurely, and became a sword of Gojoseon or even a sword saint, the eastern sword region would be affected even more. Chu Mu, I will not say anything unnecessary. The 2 people just now came from the Qing family of the central sword region. From what I know, the Qing family is a family with 3,000 years of history. In terms of background and strength, they are not inferior to any of the sword residences in the eastern sword region. The other origin stage swordsman Deshang frowned and said, "The wild wave sword hero you defeated is called Qing Tianlan. He is the most outstanding member of the younger generation of the Qing family. He is ranked 10th on the Heavenly Sword Hero ranking and the most outstanding disciple of the Divine Firmament Sword sect." Chu Mu's face was a little serious. The Divine Firmament Sword sect. This was the second time he had heard of this sword sect. It was very powerful. The Wild Wave Sword hero who had been defeated by his sword also had a shocking background. "What I want to say is that you have monstrous talent and your future is immeasurable. The prerequisite is that you do not die prematurely. Therefore, I think that you should not enter the Central Sword region from here. It would be better for you to enter the Central Sword region from the Western Sword region or the Southern Sword region. It would be better for you to avoid being hunted down by the Qing family." "Yes, Chu Mu. The Qing family will definitely not let you go. You have now become Qing Tianlan's inner demon. He must kill you for him to have a chance to improve again. Otherwise, it will be extremely difficult for him to overcome his inner demon with his willpower," the other origin stage swordsman said. "Thank you for your kind intentions, seniors." Chu Mu faintly smiled and said. He had no fear in his heart, however. "I've already decided to cross Tongming River from here and enter the Central Main Sword region. This is my path. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation."